Hello, my dear viewers. This amazing story will be very instructive for you. It is very interesting and beautiful. I wish you enjoy watching it.
When I get rich, I'll become a cool banker and invite you all to the restaurant. Steve, an excellent student, the soul of the company and a shirt guy, told his classmates. What's the occasion? Oliver, the math teacher who had entered the room, grinned wickedly. I don't care what the occasion is, smiled Steve. The main thing is to become a banker. That's true, nodded the teacher and looking at him slyly added. But I hope you remember what subject a future banker needs to know. That's right, Oliver. Steve said, for me personally, your subject is sacred. I believe that mathematics is deservedly considered the queen of sciences. Well, that's good to hear, smiled the mathematician, writing equations on the board. It's just a pity that not everyone understands it. Harry obviously disagrees with you. No, I agree, Harry said hastily, fearing that he would not be called to the blackboard. That's good, Oliver smiled even wider. Then please come to the board. We need to get these two equations straightened out. Harry stood up slowly and walked doggedly to the blackboard. The classmates, like Oliver, knew how it was going to end. To do away with equations? No, this was not Harry's student. This call to the board was no different from the previous ones. So how are we doing? Oliver turned to the board. Harry was standing there with a dejected expression on his face, crumpling his chalk in his hands. What's the problem? The teacher asked curtly. Harry, have you not been studying again? No, I did. Really, I did. The student rounded his eyes. It's just that I can't solve something. I can't get it right. What are you talking about? Oliver grinned. Sit down, my grief. Okay, we're going to go to the board, Steve. Steve went to the board and solved both equations in 5 minutes. There you go, Oliver said approvingly. Knowledge is power. And you, Harry, study the material more carefully next time, or you won't be able to solve it again. How do you see your future? That's different, Steve. He'll go far. He'll be a banker if he stays on the right path. And you, Harry, you'll be a factory nut at best. It's been a long time since then. By the way, Oliver was only half right. Steve really became a great banker and kept his promise, which either in jest or in earnest gave his classmates. When it was 15 years since graduation, Steve invited his classmates to a restaurant owned by Harry. Yesterday's underachiever became an equally cool businessman. After high school, life scattered the class to different parts of the world. Some became successful, others were content with the life of the simple, unremarkable representative of humanity. Most of the classmates communicated exclusively through social networks. As for Steve and Harry, their relationship became unexpectedly businesslike for both of them. Over time, mutually beneficial cooperation turned into a strong male friendship. It all began with the fact that the 2-year-old classmate came to the young banker for a loan for business development. Steve gave the former classmate a favorable loan. The restaurant business shot up, and Harry knew how to be grateful. He made Steve good discounts on banquets and romantic dinners in the wake of his beloved grandmother, and it all cost the banker in a purely symbolic amount. The 15th anniversary of his graduation coincided with Steve's return from Canada, where he had worked for 2 years on a contract. 2 weeks after his return, friends organized a celebratory dinner at a restaurant. Harry provided the space and engaged musicians. Steve paid for the food and drinks. From the rest of the classmates, men did not take a penny. By the way, Oliver was one of the honored guests at that meeting of classmates. Well done, Harry, he praised his former student. Honestly, I didn't expect it. It's all thanks to you, Harry replied with a smile. You've been pushing me in math, and this is the result. The old teacher laughed audibly, thinking that race was a bit of a mouthful. After all, Harry was getting in one ear and out the other. Still, Oliveric was pleased. The boys hadn't forgotten the old mathematician, and that's worth a lot. Steve, are you married? Jessica, a beautiful but frivolous person, asked him. Back in high school, she had made eyes at Steve, but the guy seemed not to notice her flirtatious glances. Classmates danced a slow dance, and the banker suddenly felt that Jessica pressed against him a little tighter than the rules of propriety allow. Steve grinned faintly. Jessica had never been burdened with complexes. No, he answered simply. What's wrong? Jessica asked with undisguised curiosity. What's wrong? smiled Steve. You're not married either, as far as I know. I'm waiting for my bestie, Jessica said, looking at him meaningfully. Well, I'm waiting for my bestie too. And what is it, your most self? Asked the persistent woman. How would I know? Steve grinned. I haven't met her yet. I'll meet her and I'll immediately realize. Here she is. I see, Jessica said disappointedly. Well, good luck finding her. Banker Steve was a public figure in town. Apparently, his bachelor status bothered almost all the single ladies. He was generally used to being approached by unencumbered women. Jessica was not the first and hardly the last. There were plenty of women who wanted to live in his beautiful and spacious country house. Some people in the business community made not very flattering assumptions about Steve, such as unconventional orientation or his love for women of advanced age. But the banker always despised and ignored gossip. Let them talk. Did Jessica have a good time? Harry asked with a chuckle as the door closed behind the last guest. Everyone was content to see each other, to enjoy some good food. There had been some mishaps, though. Frank got so drunk he fell off the stage. Fortunately, his classmate got off with a slight fright. The friends saw off the guests, listened to the words of gratitude, and then with a sense of accomplishment poured martinis into glasses and drank, snacking on olives. Yes, the friend smiled. You could say she was besieging me, all looking for a favorable party. She also hinted to me that we could be a perfect match. Really? You're a married guy, Steve wondered. That was a year and a half ago, the classmate explained. Isabella and I had just started dating, so our Jessica tried to convince me that I couldn't find anyone better than her. What does she do? She was in commercial real estate as a sole proprietor, but 2 years ago her business failed. That's it. Steve grinned understandingly. Nodded the restaurant owner, pouring a second one. Jessica was used to living large, and now, as far as I understand, she's broke and looking for someone to improve her unenviable financial situation and intends to sell herself for more money. That's the system. Yeah, Steve said sarcastically. I don't envy it. No kidding. How did you get her off? You blew her off, didn't you? Well, let's just say I politely let her know that we weren't going to get along. He smiled. Good for you. Hey, Steve, why don't we get drunk? Harry suggested it. Oh, Mel, some other time. The banker waved his hands. I want to get a good night's sleep tomorrow. It's been a busy week. It happens, Harry nodded. Steve lived in the country, and the cab ride, not counting the wait for the car, would take half an hour. And since it was Saturday, the wait could be longer. Steve looked at his watch and was surprised to find that it was not yet 7 o'clock. That's what it means to get a good night's sleep. The banker thought with satisfaction and shuddered at the thought of what would happen if he accepted his friend's offer. Definitely nothing good. Steve briskly strode into the kitchen and made coffee. A cup of scalding, aromatic coffee and a walk in the woods was the morning program of a successful young banker's day off. Steve drank his coffee leisurely, rinsed his cup, and putting on a t-shirt, shorts, and a light windbreaker, went for a walk. When Steve lived in Canada, he loved to go to the lakes and walk in the woods. Actually, it was from there that the banker brought his passion for morning walks. After such walks, his brain was charged for the week ahead, and the work was done. The man walked through the forest, breathing in the fragrant summer air with pleasure. He thought about the fact that Canada, of course, is a great country, but it was there that he realized how much he missed his native country. After the walk, Steve usually had breakfast and then spent the whole day idling, accumulating additional strength for a hard work week. After about 40 minutes, the banker headed home in anticipation of a delicious, nutritious breakfast and quality rest. Suddenly, he heard moans. Listening, Steve realized that the sounds came from the side of the road to the village. A wounded animal? Steve thought. No, it doesn't sound like it. Steve quickened his step, and when he came out of the woods, he was stunned. There was a bloody woman lying by the roadside. Apparently, she had been hit by a car. The picture is clear, he summarized. Hit and run. What kind of people are these? Steve examined his pockets and cursed. His cell phone was at home, and he couldn't even call an ambulance. Help, the woman barely audibly whispered and passed out. The banker knew that a car accident victim should not be touched until the medics arrived. Any movement could only hurt her. Yes, but what to do if he didn't have a phone? There were few cars on Sunday morning, but after about 10 minutes, Steve managed to pull over a silver foreign car and ask for a phone. "What's wrong?" the owner asked, looking suspiciously at the woman lying there. And then Steve, quite unexpectedly, gave out. "My wife and I quarreled. She ran away from home. And here you see, help me out, friend." Yes, of course, the man nodded sympathetically and handed Steve a cell phone. "Wait," the dispatcher said in an impassive voice. The banker was worried as if the stranger was really his wife. The poor woman gave no sign of life, and Steve wondered if she was alive. Taking a closer look at the woman, Steve noted that she was quite young and apparently pretty. What a subhuman, thought the banker again of the man who had run over the young woman. God forbid that all should be well. The ambulance doctor, after examining the woman, shook his head and voiced Steve's thoughts. "What kind of people are these? They don't have a cross on them." "What kind of people?" The driver shrugged his shoulders. He was afraid to face the law and was gone. The woman was put on a stretcher and the doctor said, addressing Steve, "You need to come with us too." He wanted to ask why, but remembering that he introduced himself as the husband of the victim, sat down in the car without complaint. "Well, and why do I need it? I did my job, so why am I sitting here?" Once again thought Steve, sitting near the examination room. Tomorrow at work, Monday, as you know, Monday is a hard day, and anyway, what's he got to do with it? He tried to leave in English several times, but never did. And when Steve decided to flee, the doctor came out of the room. "Are you the spouse of the victim?" he asked. "I." Steve wanted to say that he was not her husband, but just a passerby who couldn't pass by, but his tongue stuck to his mouth. "Well then," said the doctor in a businesslike tone, "your wife's life is out of danger. Her spine is intact, but she has lost her memory." "Lost her memory?" Steve asked in amazement. Wow. He realized, of course, that the human body was a mechanism in which a great many different processes took place. But memory loss seemed to Steve something from the realm of television series. In his mind, no matter what soap opera, someone is bound to lose his memory. He himself was not fond of soap operas, but after hearing a couple of conversations between his mother and her friends, the banker made just such a conclusion. And now Steve was an unwitting witness to memory loss. "Yes," nodded the doctor, whose name, as the inscription on his badge said, was Alexander. "Your wife has retrograde amnesia. Forgive my ignorance, but could you explain what it is?" The doctor began to explain, juggling with abstruse medical terms of which Steve didn't understand half. Actually, he understood only that the memory could be restored in a week or in several years. "Is there a cure?" Steve said confusedly. "Of course, we will try to speed up the process with the help of medications and perhaps hypnosis," Alexander replied. "But based on experience, I want to note that most often memory returns when a person is reminded of something about his past, or as a result of a strong shock." "Well, thank you for the information," the banker said thoughtfully. "And do I need it?" thought Steve again as he left the hospital. Dr. Alexander gave him an impressive list of medications and also said goodbye. "Don't forget to drop off your wife's paperwork tomorrow." Steve introduced the woman as Maria. It was the first name that came to his mind. The banker went to the reception desk and asked for a cab, once again asking himself the same question. When he got home, Steve went up to the second floor, which used to be the attic. It's nice here in the summer. It's cozy, and most importantly, not hot. He went out on the balcony and thoughtfully looked around. Not far from the village where the banker lived, there were scattered godforsaken villages. Looking toward the forest, Steve sighed. But now another phrase came to his mind. "We are responsible for those whom we have tamed." And Steve was also sure. This young woman did not just appear in his life. "Well, and with the documents somehow we'll sort it out," summarized the banker. Veronica's life was difficult to call serene, but the woman did not think to complain about it. Moreover, in all the trials of life that fell to her share, Veronica saw a positive moment. Life hardships made her stronger, for which the woman was immensely grateful to them. 6 months ago, Veronica had a grief. Her only daughter Maria went missing, and the inconsolable mother was left with an 8-year-old granddaughter, Elizabeth. So she had no right to be discouraged. After all, if something happened to her, and the girl will go straight to the orphanage. His only daughter, Veronica, gave birth out of wedlock and lived with her in the dormitory of the factory, in which she then worked as a secretary. The young mother came out of maternity leave and registered Maria in kindergarten, but the little girl began to be sick often. The management of the planet, to put it mildly, did not suit. They couldn't fire her for this, of course, but to force to dismiss at will quite well. Favor, sycophants, and intriguers, which the bosses, yes, used in their own interests, was plenty. Veronica was accused of stealing, which she did not commit. Unfortunately, to prove otherwise, when the bosses are determined to dismiss, is simply unrealistic. Considering that you are a conscientious employee, we will not make a fuss, said the director, averting his sly little eyes. Well, you should, but I offer you two options, resignation or dismissal by article. The choice was obvious, so the young mother was left without a job and without a place to live. Veronica and her daughter returned to her native village and settled in a dilapidated shack she had inherited from her late parents. The only person who treated the young woman humanely was Betty, an employee of the village council. This kind woman helped them to improve their living conditions, for which Veronica was eternally grateful to her. The specialist of the village administration helped them to get the house of a lonely old woman who had died alone and had no heirs. In addition, Betty helped Veronica with her job. With the help of a kind woman, the young mother got a job at the school as a checkroom attendant and a janitor in one person. The villagers disliked Veronica and talked about her inappropriately. And when Maria grew up, the locals transferred this dislike to her. The girl was blossoming and getting better, outshining the rest of the village girls, and the locals whispered, "She will go to study and bring her mother a bistro. You can't get oranges from an aspen tree." Alas, their words were prophetic. Once coming home for the weekend, Maria confessed to her mother that she was pregnant. To say that Veronica was upset was to say nothing, and she had dreamed that her daughter's life would be better than hers. But everything seems to be repeating itself. No, Veronica was not angry with her daughter. After all, a child, regardless of the circumstances of birth, is happiness. Nor did she get under Marie's skin with questions about the child's father. And so everything is clear. "Nothing, we'll get through," Veronica said to her daughter. "I lifted you up, and together we are strength." Maria nodded, but when she looked at her mother, Veronica's heart squeezed painfully. It was the look of a beaten doll. No wonder she'd get whipped. But that was half the problem. Maria had to study. Of course, no one canceled the sabbatical, but she had only a year to study. So the defense of the long-awaited diploma of psychologist postponed for a year or two. Elizabeth was born healthy and as beautiful as her mother. The times when single mothers were cast oblique glances long ago and safely passed, but apparently not for everyone. At least not for young, but ugly and ugly obese married ladies. Oh yes, no chance Maria will encroach on their two-legged happiness, which she does not need a gift. Meanwhile, Maria had completely different concerns. She did not take a leave of absence and transferred to the correspondence department. "That's right," agreed her mother. "What to lose a year or even two? Well, in 2 sessions we'll somehow survive. I'll take time off, sit with Elizabeth, while you will be at the session." After the defense of the diploma, it was necessary to think about employment, and as soon as possible. Veronica's penny salary and childcare allowance were barely enough for the essentials. "Would you like to be a psychologist at our school?" asked Betty, now a pensioner, who was a frequent visitor to Veronica's house. The prospect of working as a psychologist in her native school did not entice the university graduate, and not because this option was far from prestigious. She would not fit into the team. "They'll survive." "No, Aunt Betty, I don't want to," shook her head. "Our financial situation, of course, leaves much to be desired, but no, you understand." Betty didn't understand. She just wanted to help these people who were almost family. "I'll try to get a job in town," Maria said. But it wasn't so easy. Most employers, when they heard that she lived in the village, made frightened eyes. "How will you get there?" "By bus," Maria shrugged. But apparently, this argument did not seem too convincing to them. Lack of work experience and a small child also did not contribute to successful employment. However, the young mother did not think to be discouraged. "All this is temporary," she said. Sooner or later something will turn up. And she was right. After a couple of months of struggling, Maria managed to get a job at the Center for Psychological Assistance to Children and Adolescents. Years went by. Life went on as usual and seemed to be getting better. However, fate continued to test Veronica's family's strength. One day, Maria did not return from work. That day, she called her mother and warned that she had a lot of work, so she would come by cab. Veronica called her daughter several times, but she did not answer. Why doesn't Mom answer? Elizaveta asked through tears. Mom has just a lot of work, she said, trying her best to smile, answered her grandmother. Go to sleep, kitten. Until Mommy comes, I won't lie down, the girl said and sobbed even more. Veronica was sure something had happened to her daughter. The woman pressed the trembling granddaughter to herself, and when she, sobbing, fell asleep, sighed with relief. But what will happen tomorrow? Veronica went to the police as if to work. We're looking for her. The employees were looking for her. The poor woman only nodded doubtfully, but one day she couldn't stand it. I'd like to know how you're looking for her. After all, Maria is not a needle and still there. Don't yell at me, the policeman exclaimed indignantly. We have dozens of them besides your Maria. Maybe your Maria has taken a stroll and you are worried. You should have brought up your daughter better. How dare you? A woman graying with grief shook her head. I dare, said the police officer. Unfortunately, we have a carload and a small cart of such cases. And softened, added, I understand your grief, but you also understand us. We're doing our best, but so far, alas. I see, with a sigh, said Veronica, and went out, thinking that now she will come home and there Elizabeth. The girl is so hopeful that her mom will be found. Posts on social networks, except for comments from sympathetic citizens, did not yield any results. The fellow villagers had their own opinion on the matter. She left for a beautiful life and did not return, neighbors maligned, and she didn't spare her little one. I guess she's already serving daddies with fat wallets somewhere abroad. You should be ashamed of yourselves. Betty reprimanded them. A man's in grief, and all you want to do is scratch your tongues. Is that all you can think of? The kind woman supported Veronica and Elizabeth as best she could, but it wasn't enough. A month passed and Maria never showed up. In her mind, Veronica accepted that something terrible had happened to Maria, something very, very bad. But her maternal heart refused to accept it. Elizabeth withdrew into herself. She sat silent for long periods of time, staring out of the window. Mother is waiting, Veronica thought with a sigh. The poor woman was not the least bit relieved, but she had to be strong. Besides, one had to survive. It was hard to survive on the salary of a janitorial checkroom attendant, not to mention living with a child. Veronica occasionally looked through the newspapers for vacancies. She was ready to take any job, even the dirtiest one with a miserable salary, but rejection followed rejection. An old woman from the countryside was not the most attractive candidate. Terrible, Betty shook her head. Veronica, why don't you start selling, say, pies? And in August you'll pick tomatoes and cucumbers and start selling them too. Otherwise you'll be lost. And so kopecheka to kopecheka. Veronica thought about it. Why? It's a very good idea. Her piroshki, belyashi, sausages in dough and other baked goods are excellent. Tomato and cucumber harvest too, God willing. Angry neighbors even, there were times, whispered that this witch scares away weeds, so she grows everything. Veronica laughed. So be it. Less tongue-tie will be less, or else, just in case, I'll deprive them all of the gift of speech. Business went unexpectedly well. Veronica baked pies and other goodies, and Betty and her husband delivered them to cafes and diners on their old tin. There was enough work, and the grandmother and granddaughter were fed, clothed, and clothed. Having gathered an impressive harvest in August, Veronica, with the help of Betty and her granddaughter, rolled up about 50 different caliber jars of cucumbers, tomatoes, assorted, and patisans. Our company is thriving, Elizabeth said proudly. Veronica smiled and sighed furtively. She realized that her granddaughter was trying to hold on, but only the grandmother and the pillow knew how many tears this little girl had shed. It's hard to lose a mother at any age. And if you're only 8 years old, a few days before the new year, Elizabeth said. Bah, Tomorrow I'm coming with you. Veronica planned to sell pickles on the highway. What are you doing there? The old woman asked in surprise. And if you get bored there, stay at home with Aunt Betty. I won't get bored, the girl said stubbornly. I want to go with you. Oh, please, I'll stay out of your way. I'll be quiet, like a mouse. Veronica thought about it. Actually, it wasn't too cold outside. The place near the covered bus stop was quite busy and popular, mostly with single truckers who wanted to buy homemade pickles. The buses to the village ran well, and if Elizaveta got bored, Veronica could send her home safely. And Betty, if anything, and will meet and look after and help to melt the stove. All right, agreed, answered her grandmother with a smile, and Elizaveta, giving a triumphant cry, went to dress. You have a helper today, I see, smiled Anna, an elderly, burly woman from the neighboring village. She was selling homemade lard. Today, in addition to the lard, she had 3 goose carcasses. Yes, smiled Veronica. Well, good assistant, nodded approvingly and turned to the girl. What's your name, beautiful girl? Elizaveta, she answered importantly. Well, and me, Baba Anna. Let's get acquainted. Here, take this candy. Eat it, so to speak, for getting acquainted. Thank you, Elizabeth nodded politely. The trade was going well. The main clientele were dacha owners who planned to celebrate the new year in the country. The first customer was a man in his 50s. He bought from Veronica 3 2-liter jars of cucumber and tomato assortment, after which he approached a neighbor. He bought a good piece of lard, a goose, and encouraged by the words of the women, eat with pleasure, drove off in the direction of the city. 15 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up. A young man of about 25 and a lady of about 40 with a tail, wearing a mink coat and red lacquered boots, got out of the car. How much are the geese? He asked Anna cheerfully. 700 rubles, smiled the peddler. Archie, the lady exclaimed in horror. Don't tell me you're going to eat it. You got it absolutely right, confirmed the guy. I'll bake it with apples, with a ruddy crust. Nice. Or would you rather have it in beer? That's a good one. My son has to eat right, the woman retorted. Mom, calm down. This is the right diet, the guy said admonishingly, and ignoring the indignant look of his loving mother, took money out of his wallet. It's all cholesterol, the woman persisted. Yes, and very tasty cholesterol. Archie waved his hands and, wishing the women a happy new year, walked to the car. The buyer's mother said something about not caring about health and position in society. He objected cheerfully, and then the SUV started and drove off into the countryside, most likely to a dacha village where rich people lived. The women laughed merrily. Yes, I don't envy this lover of good food. Anna laughed through her tears. I suppose his mother gives him steamed cutlets and stewed vegetables. That's right. Veronica picked up on it, and without salt. The old businesswoman laughed again. Today they had worked hard. By lunchtime all the goods were sold, and Anna called her son-in-law to pick her up. He arrived about 20 minutes later, and the women warmly said goodbye and congratulated each other on the coming holiday. Baba, I want to eat, Elizabeth whimpered. All the food supplies had been eaten, and the bus was delayed. Besides, suddenly there was a strong wind. Is there a snowstorm coming? Veronica was worried. The bus was still not coming, and the elderly woman called the dispatcher's office, where she was told that the bus was delayed. A few minutes later, something unimaginable began. It seemed that the snowstorm, which despite Veronica's fears still played out, would now pick them up and carry them away for faraway lands. The woman liked what was happening less and less. Let's go beyond the stop. It's not so snowy there, she said to the crying Elizaveta, thinking at the same time, what an old fool. Well, why the devil did she bring the child with her? And just they took a step beyond the stop, as a truck rushed past them, and Veronica, not keeping her balance, flew into the ditch. Elizabeth was stunned, and then screamed as loud as she could. Grandma, bada. Now, grandmother barely audibly moaned, writhing in pain, though she wanted to howl, but she couldn't scare the child. Now, dearie, I'll come up and... Veronica fainted. When Elizabeth saw that her grandmother had suddenly closed her eyes, she sobbed out loud. Grandma, no, she cried. And cars were passing by, and none of them cared about the crying girl. At first, Elizaveta wanted to go down to her grandmother, but realized that the two of them could not get up. It would be better to ask someone for help. The girl went out onto the road and frantically waved her arms. "Help!" Elizabeth shouted tearfully, smearing tears on her face. She was very scared, and the cars kept coming and coming. "Is there a problem, young lady?" asked a young, richly dressed man who got out of a glossy black car. "Any help needed?" Steve did a lot of charity work. Right now, he was on his way back from a New Year's Eve party for orphanage children. The sponsor of the party was his bank, and Mr. Steve came to the tree to get a legitimate portion of applause and gratitude. To tell the truth, he never liked to show off. Yes, Steve drove an expensive car and wore brand-name clothes, but he knew he had earned it all through hard work. Unlike unnecessary, in general, praise in public, Steve sincerely believed that good deeds should be done in silence. Although, of course, if the management of orphanages are pleased to thank him in this way, publicly and pompously, well, it's their right. Everything is better than mercantile ladies desperately trying to marry a young banker. Remembering the hunters for his money, Steve grinned. That was it. There was nothing more for them. That June morning changed his life dramatically. The day after the accident victim arrived at the hospital with Steve, he went there again. The banker brought all the necessary medications and asked how she was. "No change," Alexander replied. "I think you'll be able to visit your wife in a day or two." The words "visit your wife," although they sounded unusual to the ear of a 32-year-old bachelor, unexpectedly liked Steve. When he realized this, he was very surprised. Maybe it's a sign that it's really time for me to get married. After all around say so, ironically thought the banker. With documents was more difficult, but Steve told the doctor that he found no passport or policy. Apparently, Maria left the house with the documents. He guiltily waved his hands. "But when I found her, she didn't have her purse. So, you know what I mean." "Yes, but then." Dr. Alexander made a meaningful pause, and Steve understood him perfectly. "How much?" he asked. "There on the wall is a price list of paid services," Alexander replied. Steve nodded and, after studying the cost of the services, turned back to the doctor. He pulled out his wallet, took out two $5,000 bills, and slipped them into the pocket of the doctor's coat. "Payment for services at the registrar's office," Alexander said, a little embarrassed. "Thank you for the information," smiled the banker. "I will pay now. And this money is my gift to you." Well, thank you. But you may want to move your wife to a private clinic. Usually people in your line of work." "I don't know what people in our circle do, but somehow I trust you," Dr. Steve interrupted cheerfully, "and I hope you'll justify my trust." "I'll do my best," Alexander replied with dignity. On the third day of his spouse's stay in the hospital, Steve visited her. On the way, he bought fruit, a bottle of fresh juice from his favorite restaurant, and wild tea roses. Approaching the hospital, the banker realized that he was worried. Just like before a first date, he cheered up and thought that was essentially what it was. When Steve entered the room, a young woman was half sitting on a cushion and looking straight ahead. The patient raised her large and serious brown eyes to Steve, and the banker realized he was missing. "Why, she's not just pretty," marveled Steve. "She's a real beauty. And no pouty lips and those creepy eyebrows halfway down her forehead." By the way, the eyebrows, like the eyes, struck the man in the heart. Dark, parted, beautifully shaped. The brown hair of the beautiful stranger was gathered in a careless knot, but Steve had no doubt that it was beautiful. Or was that what he wanted to think? After examining his charge, Steve opened his mouth to ask how she was feeling, but the young woman beat him to it. "Are you my husband?" she asked quietly and hesitantly, crumpling the corner of the blanket. "That's not really true," Steve replied softly. He had no desire to lie to a man who was in a helpless state. Besides, the banker no longer doubted for a moment that he had fallen in love like a boy. So he mentally stated with great regret that he could not do without a certain amount of lying. "All right, we'll figure it out," Steve decided lightly, unable to take his eyes off the sick woman. "Not really." She raised an eyebrow, and Steve mentally groaned. At this moment, Maria, as he introduced her to the doctor, was just unrealistically beautiful. Then what would happen when the bruises and abrasions came off that pretty face? I'll probably go crazy with love, Steve thought with a chuckle. So much for the one and only. Steve wasn't really amused to think that for once he was in love, except the circumstances weren't exactly ideal, to say the least. Hush, hush, the banker soothed his conscience. I will definitely confess everything. Now for me, the task number one, to create for Maria the most comfortable conditions. By the way, I wonder what her name is really. The young woman stared at him, and Steve remembered that she was waiting for an answer. Yes, not really, he confirmed. It's just that you and I were just about to get married. I see. Maria nodded, and Steve thought, it's not easy to lie to my eyes, at least for me. Come on. Again, the man began to reason with his conscience. No one has ever abolished lying for salvation. An old miracle. My conscience was soothed. I was told my name was Maria, she said. And you? It's funny, of course, to meet your future husband. And the beauty laughed her melodious laugh. Yes, it is funny indeed, he agreed. But it's normal in our case, isn't it? Yes, I guess so. So what's your name? I'm Steve, the banker replied and smiled slyly. And it's a pleasure to meet you. You too, Maria said, and her voice sounded sincere. Unless, of course, Steve was wishful thinking, but apparently not. The young woman looked at him sympathetically and, incidentally, not without interest. He knew that woman's look. And the flowers are very pretty, she added with a smile. I tried, Steve replied with genuine tenderness in his voice, and thought he would do it as often as possible. Lying is disgusting, but he would try to win this beauty over. And who knows, maybe the matter will really end in a wedding. 2 weeks later, Steve took Maria home. At first, he planned to make her a fake passport. The money and connections allowed him to do it. But then the banker abandoned the idea. It was one thing to lie to the doctor that he and Maria were married. Otherwise, Steve wouldn't have been allowed to see her. But to slip a fake passport to a man whose memory is like a blank slate is a real pig. Steve told the doctor that it would take at least a month to restore the documents, and he only nodded understandingly. 2 weeks passed, and except for the loss of memory, the young woman felt quite tolerable. So Alexander decided that she could be discharged. And it turned out that in the end, the doctor turned a blind eye to the lack of documents, for which he received a good sum at discharge. On the eve of discharge day, Steve called his friend Harry. So tell me, where does your Isabel address? Harry was in the know, so his classmate's question didn't surprise him. I never realized you were such an adventurer, Harry remarked when the banker told him of his intentions. I didn't think so myself, Steve admitted, and then his friend handed the phone to his wife. Isabella listed her favorite ladies' stores, and the banker, thanking her, went shopping. The sales girls looked curiously at the man, in whom they recognized the owner of the bank, but did not say anything. But Steve was a sharp shooter. The banker knew exactly. These clever bitches with model looks are probably wondering for whom the famous banker buys all this closet. He quite admitted that not today, so tomorrow, the report from the shopping will excite the city. Oh, the internet. Steve had bought everything needed for a complete ladies' closet from lingerie to outerwear. Thank God I'm not tight on funds, he thought. Otherwise, how will I get by? On the day of the discharge, Steve bought Marie a beautiful dress, shoes, a luxurious basket of roses, and gently putting her in the car, said, "Shall we go home?" She only nodded with a smile. In those 2 weeks, Steve and Maria, or who was she, had become very attached to each other. All the patients were jealous of this beautiful brunette with the shy smile. One could only dream of Steve's reverence for her. I wonder how they would react if they knew the truth. The banker had asked himself that question more than once. What did he care about some strange women, though? But the question of how the lady of his heart would feel about this lie really did not give Steve peace. And although he repeatedly entered into dialogues with his conscience, trying to convince her that there will be a day there will be food, on Steve's soul was sticky and dirty residue. But one way or another, Maria had to be taken to his house. Where would he take her? Steve couldn't help but realize that Maria's relatives might be looking for her. So one evening, he took a picture of the young woman and posted a post on social networks. However, the result was zero. One single user left a comment that not so long ago someone was looking for a similar girl, and that was it. Then Steve had no time to post. He was busy at work, and when he remembered about it again, he reasonably decided that the relatives of his ward, if any, could do something about it themselves. Hiring a nurse was not an option. Maria served herself and did not go beyond the territory. "What if I get lost?" she said with a laugh. "Then I promise to walk you around the village every day," solemnly swore Steve. "I assure you, there is much to see here." And they walked, swimming in the lake, picking flowers, berries, and then mushrooms. It was really great, but the lies poisoned all the joy. Maria felt quite well. The only thing that bothered the young woman was periodic attacks of headache, but Alexander prescribed pills for that. All that remained was to wait. But for what? Marital relations were out of the question. Spouses slept in separate bedrooms, although to hide it, there were some playful thoughts. You're not a monk, and when the house walks such a beauty with a seductive figure, it is difficult to think only about nature and the weather. There are probably men out there who would take advantage of the situation. But because Steve was a decent man, this did not happen. He decided at once, if it does happen, it'll be fair. It would be a good idea to get to know each other better first. But it's easy to say, get to know each other. A person who is faced with the loss of a relative's memory will have to, shall we say, familiarize him with himself. But after all, Steve himself knew nothing about the young woman he had given the name Maria. Yes, the situation, he thought. If someone had told me under what circumstances I would meet my love, I would never have believed it. In the meantime, Steve was being bombarded with questions. Where and how did we meet? Do we have kids? Have we lived here long? And so on. Steve felt like his brain was about to explode. When Maria asked him to tell the story of how they met, he mumbled something like, "Just an ordinary college party. We liked each other so. Where did we go to school?" The young woman asked, looking at Steve inquisitively with her beautiful eyes. "Good question," grinned Steve mentally. "Well, it's all clear with me, but where did she study?" "The Institute of Commerce and Law." He named the school he had graduated from. "Yes," Maria asked with surprise and thought deeply. And Steve thought, that would be funny if she graduated from some Sharashkinoi office, and I attributed to her a prestigious university. Steve suddenly remembered what Maria was wearing when he discovered her. She was wearing a summer business suit. This suggested that Maria worked for a decent organization that accepted people with a college degree. Well, or at least graduates of technical schools. So, a Sharashkin office could be safely dismissed. When Alexander gave Steve this outfit, the banker did not hesitate to burn it. The suit was torn, blood-stained, and unwearable. "So maybe you shouldn't have done it," Harry snorted. "What if your beautiful stranger had seen it and remembered what had happened to her and who she was?" Steve slammed his fist on his forehead. "What an idiot," he exclaimed. "That's right, isn't it? But on the other hand, is it worth scaring her?" Also true. One day, Steve woke up to a mind-blowing odor. It smelled of coffee and something else distinctly meaty. The intrigued banker sharply threw off the blanket and went to the kitchen, where he saw a rather nice picture. Maria, dressed in a light olive-colored silk robe, which went surprisingly well with her dark eyes and hair, was frying pancakes. Some of the pancakes, filled with chopped chicken and mushrooms, were laid out on a platter. What wonderful flavors," Steve said excitedly. "Can I try some?" "Of course," smiled Maria. "Do you want it with sour cream?" "Yes," he nodded, pouring himself some orange juice. "And she's a very decent cook," thought the banker. Steve was pleasantly surprised. Pretty, slim, economical, and she seemed to have a good character. "We should take her." "Do you like her?" the ward asked. "Very much." With a satisfied smile, Steve replied, reaching out for another pancake. "Did I often make pancakes?" "Often," said Steve laconically, hoping that would be the case. Steve sighed, Maria said, and the banker realized there was another batch of questions to come. "Yes," trying to sound carefree, he said. What did his ward have in store for him this time? "Steve, do we have any pictures of us together?" "That's why I'm asking. Maybe if I saw them, I'd remember everything." "Well, it's unbearable to live without knowing who I am," Maria finished pathetically. Steve sighed. "Here we go again. What's so strange about it, though?" "It's a predictable question. And if you think about it, it's strange that she didn't ask it right away. But when your head's a mess, it's really hard to think straight. You see, Maria, Steve said slowly, thinking up an explanation as he went along. The photo albums were lost when I moved into this house. Sure, I had a lot of photos on my smartphone, but I lost it not too long ago. And when I bought a new one, we somehow didn't take pictures. I had a lot of work to do. I see. But I promised to make up for it. You and I will definitely be photographed together, smiled Steve, and looking at the clock added, and now I have to go to work. Thanks for breakfast. It was delicious. Got away with it, Steve thought, starting up his infinity. Once again, Maria's memory was stubbornly unwilling to recover, and Steve had mixed feelings about it. On the one hand, the young banker was used to the company of a mysterious, beautiful stranger. And if Maria remembered who she was and where she came from, she would return to her former life. But what about him? On the other hand, he wished this story would end soon. But Steve was afraid to imagine what the outcome would be. Would he be accused of holding the man down? True, Maria's relatives never showed up, but who knows what was wrong? Maybe they hadn't seen his post. Steve envisioned the bold headlines in the media and on the internet. Banker Steve held woman down. Thinking about it, Steve hummed cheerfully. That's how they lived. Maria cooked delicious breakfasts, lunches, and dinners. Steve worked and pleased his beloved with bouquets of flowers and arranged shopping for her. From time to time, the ward would ask him questions and Steve would come up with answers. A few months later, Marie had a dream. The young woman dreamed that she was holding a baby in her arms. Waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning, Maria made her way determinedly to Steve's room. Maria? He was surprised. Is something wrong? Are you sick? Steve, tell me, did we have a child? Persistently asked the ward. A baby? What baby? I had a dream that I was holding a baby in my arms. Oh, a dream? Steve was relieved. Well, it was just a dream. I mean, how many dreams can you have? That doesn't mean it's true. Yes, I understand, Maria said excitedly. But, it was like it was real. And it's like my brain cleared up. Steve, I think I'm starting to remember. The banker's heart started to race. Well, that's it. Now Maria's going to say he's been lying to her, and she wants nothing to do with Steve. What did you remember? He asked breathlessly. I remembered that my name was really Maria, the young woman said with a smile in her voice. And it was real. Well, that's interesting. So Steve, spontaneously thinking up a name for her, had hit the nail on the head. It's hardly a figment of his ward's imagination. Dr. Alexander explained that during the process of memory retrieval, a person remembers everything that actually happened. So, is it the child too? Not a fact, the banker pondered. She remembered her name in reality, and the child was a dream. But one way or another, it must be finished. What if we hire a private detective? Struck the young banker, and he wondered how this simple thought had not occurred to him at once. Done. In the morning, Steve had to go to the New Year's party for the children of the orphanage. Then he would confess everything to Maria, apologize, and find a private detective. Steve looked at his ward. Maria was sleeping sweetly, sniffling like a little girl, and looked incredibly touching. No, he couldn't let go of this amazing girl so easily. We'll be together, vowed Steve. Whatever it takes. What a weather, Evan, the banker's driver muttered in a disgruntled voice. It was so calm in the morning, and now the windshield wipers were failing, and the ice chips were hitting the windshield audibly. Steve was tuning in for a difficult conversation with Maria and was very nervous. And then there was the snowstorm, which had played out so inconveniently. After a couple of kilometers, the men groaned. Right on the roadway stood a little girl and desperately waved her hands. Where had she come from? Evan slowed down, Steve said, though he didn't need to. The driver was already slowing down. The men jumped out of the car, and the banker asked if the girl needed help. There, the little girl sobbed, pointing toward the ditch. My grandmother. She fell. She's sick. Evan and Steve didn't waste time talking. The banker put the little girl in the car and they ran to the ditch. Once down, the men found an elderly woman. She was unconscious. The driver touched her pulse and convinced that the woman was alive. picked her up in his arms and carried her to the car. "Grandmother," cried the little girl on a burst of tears. Poor grandmother. In the warm car, Veronica regained consciousness and moaned. "What's the matter with you?" Steve asked. "My leg," whispered the old woman, and tears came to her eyes. "It really hurts." She could have broken her leg, thought the banker, considering what to do. If he called an ambulance, he did not know when it would arrive. In this blizzard. "We'll take you to the hospital now," Steve said softly. "No," the older woman shook her head. "I can't go to the hospital, but you could have a fracture." "Elizaveta, there's no one to leave her with," she said faintly. "Babs, I can and alone," assured the granddaughter. "Or at Aunt Ira's I'll spend the night." "But what if something serious?" "Here's what, ladies," Steve made a decision. "Now we'll take you to the hospital, and I can take the girl with me. Don't worry, I don't mean any harm." The grandmother and granddaughter hesitantly looked at each other, and Evan said with a smile, "Steve is a kind-hearted man. We're gonna be waiting a long time for an ambulance." "Well, if it's not too much trouble," Veronica said quietly, thinking that the world is not without good people. The snowstorm was slowly but surely subsiding, so they reached the city quite quickly. When they arrived at the trauma center, Steve felt a sense of déjà vu. Despite the tragedy of the situation, the man grinned mentally. He seemed to be making a habit of picking people up on the road. "Steve, you idiot." He berated himself for making such stupid jokes. Seeing a modestly dressed woman getting out of a premium car accompanied by a distinguished gentleman, the doctor was surprised. However, recognizing the respectable man as an old acquaintance, Alexander was glad to see him as his own. Maybe he would give him some more money. "What are you doing here?" he asked, shaking the banker's hand. "I brought my grandmother," Steve explained. "Picked her up on the highway. She may have broken her leg." "Well, we'll see. Let me know what's wrong with her." "Okay." The surprised doctor shrugged his shoulders and disappeared into the examination room. After about 20 minutes, Alexander came out and said, "Grandma's leg is indeed broken. Fortunately, the fracture is uncomplicated. Can I take her away?" "No." Alexander shook his head. "We'll leave Grandma for a week." "I see," nodded the banker. "Maybe you need something. Some medicine or something." "No. The hospital has everything we need. Maybe some vitamins, calcium to strengthen the bones, or cottage cheese, dairy, fish." "Got it." The doctor was completely confused. Is he going to buy food and medicine for a strange granny? Alexander thought, perplexed. There's nowhere to put the money. "Then I'll go to the store." Steve confirmed his assumptions. After picking up a full bag of fruit, yogurt, cottage cheese, a large box of juice, and a couple of chicken breasts in the supermarket, the banker took the products to the hospital and they rolled back. "Let's go to my place," Steve said cheerfully to the little passenger. Elizabeth nodded importantly. The girl felt that this rich uncle on a beautiful car is a good and kind man. "And what do you do?" daring asked Elizabeth. "I am a banker," smiled Steve. "Banker," with respect stretched out the girl and simply asked, "You must be rich." "Rich," he did not hide the obvious. "Great," Elizabeth said approvingly. "I think so too," laughed the banker. The roads were thoroughly snowed over, and there was a long traffic jam on the way out of town. I should call Maria, Steve thought, and took out his cell phone and dialed her number. "Don't worry, it's just a traffic jam," he said. "Maria, I'm not alone tonight." No, it's not friends or partners. You'll see later." "Sure, get some sleep. You'll feel better." "It's probably from the sudden change of weather." The banker added one last thing. "Whatever you say, darling. Kisses." "Is this your wife?" Elizaveta asked in a businesslike manner. "Well, you could say that," Steve sighed. "Why can you say that?" the girl asked, giving Steve a piercing look. At that moment, Elizabeth reminded him of someone. "But who?" "How can I explain it to you?" he answered, thinking that an affirmative answer would have been enough. "Now you explain." "It's just that we live together, but not officially signed," Steve said, and the girl nodded thoughtfully. "I see, you have a civil marriage." "Well, in general, yes," summarized the banker. Steve and his little guest arrived in the village in the evening. "Wow, what a beautiful house," exclaimed Elizabeth when they drove up to Steve's mansion. I'm glad you like it, smiled the owner of the house. Come on in. Don't be shy. And where is your wife? Asked the girl. My wife is not feeling well right now, but when she sleeps, she will feel better, and she will definitely join us. Is your wife pretty? Very beautiful, smiled the banker. For me, she is the most beautiful. You are a lucky man, summarized the girl. I think so too, laughed the man. But you know what would make me even happier? What? Elizabeth asked with interest. A delicious and nutritious dinner. I don't know about you, but I'm starving. Are you? I am, the little guest admitted maturely. Steve heated up a soup with mixed vegetables and beefsteak from Harry's restaurant. They were accompanied by rice and spaghetti. The hospitable host asked Elizabeth what she would eat the steaks with, and the girl opted for spaghetti. Great, Steve said. I'll heat up the spaghetti now. In the meantime, we'll have soup. It's perfect for the cold weather. While the guest appetizingly nibbled on vegetable soup, the banker looked at her with curiosity. He liked the girl, so pretty and smart. Suddenly, Steve thought that he could have a daughter of the same age, or a son. Elizabeth, how old are you? Steve asked. 8. And I'm 32. 24 is a normal age to be a father. And my parents keep asking me when I'm going to give them grandchildren. God, what's going through my head? Uncle Steve, how did you become a banker? Elizabeth suddenly asked him, and he almost choked. What can I say? An unexpected question for an 8-year-old girl. The numbskull is already 10, so he seems to be interested in nothing but computer games. Well, I wanted to be a banker for starters, Steve chuckled. 6th grade. I was told I could change my mind 100 times before I graduated, but no. And after school, I went to the Institute of Commerce and Law. Then I worked in a solid company, took advanced training courses, and as a consequence, started my own business. Elizabeth listened attentively, looking at the banker with respect. And when Steve stopped talking, she asked, Are there any female bankers? And yes, inquisitive God, thought Steve and replied, Well, why not? Elizabeth, I'll tell you this. It's not gender that matters, it's responsibility. Irresponsible people have nothing to do in the financial sphere. And of course, the desire to constantly learn and develop. During the conversation, they did not notice how Maria entered the kitchen. Something I'm not good today, she said faintly and greeted the little guest with a smile. Hello. Let's get acquainted. My name is Maria. Elizabeth looked at the woman who entered with all her eyes. The girl looked at Maria as if she recognized someone in her, but she was not sure that she was not mistaken. What happened next left Steve completely stunned. Mom? His young guest whispered in shock and rushed to Maria without hesitation. All day Maria had not been feeling well. She had a headache, but on top of that, the young woman was somehow uncomfortable. Then there was that dream about the baby. After Steve's call, she felt a little better. Maria looked out the window and looked out at the snowy surroundings and realized why she felt uneasy. The young woman was certain she had a child, or even had one. But then where was it now? And most importantly, why was Steve hiding it? And maybe something happened to our child, and that's why I lost my memory. Frowning, Maria thought, and Steve does not tell me anything, because he is afraid for my psyche. But my memory will come back sooner or later. Her head didn't hurt anymore, but she felt physically heavy from thinking. The young woman fell asleep, as she usually did after taking the medicine the doctor had prescribed. She lay in bed and instantly fell asleep. Through her sleep, Maria heard a car pull up, and after a while she heard the voice of Steve and a little girl. Hearing the child's voice, Maria thought she was hallucinating. The voice of the child, most likely a girl, seemed vaguely familiar to Maria. For whatever reason, the child's voice only made her more certain that the child was not just a dream or a figment of her imagination distorted by memory loss. As Maria descended the stairs, the child's voice became more and more distinct. Her head suddenly felt treacherously dizzy. She leaned on the railing, and when it was gone, she walked on. Maria was already in the kitchen. The girl sat at the table across from Steve and munched on her soup. What a pretty little girl, thought Maria, and a powerful wave of tenderness suddenly came over her. The guest was dark-haired and brown-eyed like herself. But where had this little girl come from? The young woman greeted the little girl warmly, and she looked at Maria with a look that made her heart sink. And before Maria knew it, the girl had called her mommy. She said it in a whisper, but Maria's voice seemed like the sound of thunder. Before the eyes of the young woman appeared some vague fragments of memories. Here was Maria holding the newborn girl, swaddling her and whispering some tender words. The village, angry and jealous gossipy neighbors, and this girl, who was now sitting at the table with her husband. But now the young woman remembered quite clearly that she had never been married. But then why had Steve called himself her husband? Maria remembered a car coming at her, and she didn't have time to run aside. The next thing she knew, it was total darkness. But before plunging into that darkness, the young woman was rushing home from town. To this very girl who was her daughter Elizabeth, and to her mother, whose name was Veronica. Maria's memory unraveled like a ball of thread. She remembered, and Elizabeth clung to her and laughing or crying said, "Mommy, my beloved mommy, I knew that you were alive and that you had not abandoned me." Maria cried too, but Steve was relieved to see that they were tears of happiness. She stroked her daughter's head and said, "Of course I didn't leave you, my doll, my favorite bunny." Mary kissed her daughter's face and from time to time, laughing through her tears, looked into her eyes and could not look at her. Elizabeth's hair was wet with her mother's tears. The banker looked at them with all his eyes and thought, "Is it really so?" Banker had laughed at his mother more than once when she had assured him that the plots for TV shows were taken from life. Well, now he was ready to take it back. God, how touching it all looked. By the way, what a story for a TV show. Maria was in such euphoria from the meeting with her daughter that she did not immediately remember about the essentials. For example, the fact that for 6 months she has been in the house of a stranger. Maria remembered that Steve had brought her here from the hospital. But why? The young woman already knew that the purse with her phone and passport were not with her. Perhaps the bag had flown off to the side, or the person who hit her decided to make a profit. Alas, it happens. So there really wasn't much to go on. Besides, Maria had lost her memory and couldn't tell us anything about herself. But maybe this man was still looking for Maria's relatives, and he managed to do it only now? It seems all logical, but something prevented to fully accept this version. All later, smiling through tears, thought the happy woman. Now the main thing is that my Elizabeth, my sweet girl, is now with me. And what about Mom? Elizabeth? Maria called out to her daughter. Sleepily muttered the little girl, dozing on her mother's lap. Are you asleep? Her mother laughed softly, stroking her fragile body. Aha, happily smiling, replied daughter. I'm not surprised, Steve said. She is cold, poor thing, and so many impressions in one day. By the way, how did you find each other? Maria asked. And where is Mom? Elizabeth, where's Grandma? She, of course, was happy to meet her daughter, but she wanted to dot all the I's. Mom, Grandma is in the hospital, sleepily replied her daughter. In the hospital? What about her? Maria was scared. Calm down, Mom. Everything is already fine, smiled Elizabeth. It was all Uncle Steve and Evan. They saved her. Saved her? Maria marveled. Saved her from what? She knew perfectly well that Evan was the driver of the consort. But what kind of trouble had her mother and daughter gotten into that they had to be rescued? So many questions. Steve shook his head. Well, we do have a lot to talk about, but why don't we put Elizabeth to bed first? The baby is blowing her nose, by the way. Yes, of course, nodded the young woman. I want to sleep with Mommy, said the girl. Can I? Well, of course you can. Steve and Maria replied in unison. Don't worry, I'm only here for one night, and then you will sleep together again, I understand. Maria blushed, and the banker laughed. I wonder what you understand, Steve asked. Well, if you are going to be married, you must sleep together, Elizabeth explained, showing her perplexity. Well, of course you do. Grown people, and they don't understand such obvious things. Old times, old mores, said the banker cheerfully. Maria, I am waiting for you in the parlor. When Maria, having put her daughter to bed, came down to the living room, Steve was savoring his favorite Spanish wine. This divine beverage was brought to him directly from the homeland of flamenco and bullfighting. The wine was tart and moderately sweet, and the banker did not recognize any other. Will you have a drink? He offered. Pour, Maria waved her hand. It's a sin not to drink to such a thing. I think so too. The banker poured wine into glasses, and after they took a sip, said, "You probably think I've kept you here deliberately. And for what purpose?" Maria asked with a chuckle. "I don't know," Steve said awkwardly. "For example, to take advantage of your helpless state." "But you didn't," she continued with a smile. "I assure you, I think nothing of the sort. Although, of course, there are questions." "Well, I'm ready to answer them. Where do we start?" "Well, preferably first. There's not much to tell," Steve sighed. "During a morning walk, I found you on the side of the road, apparently hit by a car, and like a decent man, called an ambulance, and called me your spouse. It was an accident. I didn't have my cell phone with me, so I had to stop at the first car I saw and borrow a cell phone. But you should have seen the way you looked at me." Steve grinned. "Like a maniac." Maria laughed, and the banker, who also could not help laughing, summarized. "Well, I had to improvise. Said, had a fight with my wife. I went to look for her, and here, well, and in the hospital just repeated." "You got into character," Maria giggled. Steve looked at her and noted that he had never seen Maria in such a playful mood. And that was because she was truly happy right now. So maybe now was a good time to confess her feelings. "No, Maria, that's not why," Steve replied seriously. "If I hadn't said that, they wouldn't have let me come to you. And you and I wouldn't be sitting here right now. And you would never have known that Maria, I love you." "Steve, don't say anything. I know it's a surprise to you, but I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes. I realize now that I've loved you from the first moment I met you, and I'll never give you up. So don't expect to get rid of me. I'm willing to wait until I'm old." "It's not just that," Maria said with a sigh. "Steve, I'm just an ordinary woman, an average single mom from the country. I don't hang out in nightclubs and hookah lounges. I don't drive expensive foreign cars, and I don't get my eyelashes and nails done every 2 weeks. In general, I live the life of an ordinary woman, concerned about how to feed, clothe, and pack a child for school. And that's fine." Steve summed it up. "I've already seen these women who love clubs, hookah lounges, and everything that can be built up. All tuning, and there is no beauty. Not on the outside, not on the inside. You're the real deal. I'd forgotten there were girls like you." Maria listened to Steve, and she really wanted to believe that he spoke sincerely. After all, she liked Steve too, but she had been burned too badly. No matter what the neighbors said about her supposedly wild life in the city, there was only one man in Maria's life, Elizabeth's father, a biker with movie star looks, and as it turned out, a rotten soul. And how beautifully it all began. Rides on the highway at cosmic speeds, which took your breath away. A luxurious bouquet of roses in the window of the dormitory with a crane, and not for his birthday, but just like that, without reason, flashy nightclubs, and words. "I promise you nothing." As soon as Maria informed him of the pregnancy, more wine. Steve's voice came through the veil. Steve saw how embarrassed and tense Maria was and hurried to diffuse the situation. "No, thanks," she shook her head and added with a smile. "I've had enough. I'm not used to alcohol." "That's okay," Steve said cheerfully. "I'll teach you bad habits." "Steve, what about my mom?" Maria remembered and felt ashamed. With excitement, she had forgotten all about her mother. And Steve told her about the meeting with Veronica and Elizabeth. Maria cried. Poor little things. How hard it had been for them all that time. They didn't have a good life selling pickles on the road. It's not safe. There's a lot of idiots out there. Now Steve was ashamed of himself. He had actually deprived a child of a mother and a poor old woman of her daughter's help. The banker imagined what they had endured during those 6 months and hated himself. Idiot, thought Steve. I couldn't think of anything else to do in 6 months except a lousy post. It was my fault, Steve repented. I could have hired a private detective, but to be honest, it only occurred to me this night when you told me your dream. But all I did was put the post on social media. You a soul. Now Maria understood why she wasn't satisfied with the version that Steve had only managed to track down Mom and Elizabeth today. Of course she had. A man of his position could have hired a private detective or used the connections that the banker probably had, although the post was also an option. It just depended on the people. And what? Maria asked. Did anyone respond to the post? No. He waved his hands. Well, except that someone commented, say, recently looked for a similar woman. No one had seen me, Maria shrugged. Here, unlike in our village, no one cares about anyone. That's how things got so quiet. That's probably what Mom was looking for. And she, like you, thought the post was a worthwhile idea. Yeah, Steve chuckled. Well, do you remember what happened to you? Oh, nothing much, really. That day, when Steve celebrated in the restaurant a meeting of classmates in the Center for Psychological Health, where Maria worked, arrived important guests from the regional center. The meeting dragged on, and in addition, she had some paperwork to do. Not only that Maria had to wait for a cab for more than 40 minutes, but it also broke down right in the middle of the highway. What should I do? The young woman asked the cab driver in a low voice. I'll try to fix it. The driver shrugged his shoulders and began to examine his iron horse. It was getting dark outside, and Maria wondered how long they would be here. Ah, we've arrived, the cab driver replied nonchalantly. How do you mean? The passenger was taken aback. And like this, the belt broke. Now I call a tow truck and food. But maybe there is a possibility to replace it with another car. Confused asked Maria. This is on Saturday. The driver grinned crookedly. So you can wait for this other car until morning. Catch that hitchhiker. I can't offer anything else. What the hell? She was indignant. What did I pay money for? Money, grumbled the man. I'll give you your money back. Half. You're halfway there. Maria didn't mind, though in fairness she should have demanded all the money. Was the car's malfunction her problem? And there's no telling how long she'd spend on this highway. God forbid they mistake her for a member of the ancient profession. So the neighbors are judging. The wrecker took away the broken car, and Maria has nothing left but to cuckoo-chat on the highway. And then she heard a characteristic noise from behind, loud music, and rapidly flew up, and silence. Most likely, the driver was drunk, Maria suggested. I was standing on the side of the road, and it seems, the road was not enough. They talked until 2 o'clock in the morning, when Steve realized he had to work tomorrow. Good night, the young woman smiled. I'm going to go enjoy being a mom. Catching up on my reading. You're a lucky man, said the banker, quite like Elizabeth recently. Can't complain. Maria, Steve called out to her as she came up the stairs. Yes, the guest turned around. But you're not saying no to me, are you? Asked Steve. No, replied Maria quietly. I don't say no. The young woman entered the bedroom and smiled happily. Elizabeth was sleeping on the double bed with her dark curls spread on the pillow. The girl smiled in her sleep, and the happy mother looked at her for a long time. And tomorrow I will see my mother, Maria thought. I'll give her a big, big hug. This Steve is like a guardian angel for our family. First, he didn't leave me to die on the side of the road. Then he saved Mom and Elizabeth. Miracles indeed. With these happy thoughts, Elizabeth fell asleep. For the first time in the last 6 months, she slept so soundly and serenely. Veronica woke up in high spirits. She felt that something good would happen on this day. A young nurse came into the room. Which one of you is Veronica? She asked. I am, said the older woman. There's someone here to see you. The nurse left, and Elizabeth ran into the room. She was followed by the man who had brought her to the hospital. Hello, he smiled. Well, how was your leg? Already better, replied Veronica gratefully. I will refrain from dancing for now, but I'm trying to walk. Well, if you're joking, then all is well. Grandma and we have a surprise, smiled mysteriously Elizabeth. What kind of surprise? The granddaughter went out into the corridor and returned accompanied by Maria. Maria, exclaimed Veronica. Mama. Maria rushed to her mother and sobbed in her voice. But how could it be? Through her tears, her mother asked, What happened to you, Maria? Where have you been? Noticing that they were being watched with interest by 2 neighbors in the ward, Maria said, Oh, you can't tell me at once. It's long, well, and I'd like it without strangers. Can we go out into the corridor? Veronica suggested. Can you do that? Her daughter asked anxiously. Well, somehow. The old woman was anxious to know what had happened to her daughter. Maria and Steve helped Veronica Ivanovna out. They sat down in the chairs, and the trio told her everything. You, Steve, are like a guardian angel. The older woman voiced her daughter's recent thoughts. Maybe, Steve replied. But I'm not an angel. I'm just an ordinary man. But I'd still like to be a close friend to your family. Steve looked meaningfully at Maria, and Veronica understood at once. So we do not need angels, laughed the woman. But I wouldn't mind a good, kind, and reliable husband for my daughter. Mom. What, Mom? Mom will not advise badly. All you have to do is to be happier than I am. Try it. Once you're unlucky, life doesn't end there. So you don't mind. Steve's happy. I've given you my blessing, Veronica said authoritatively. I don't mind either, said Elizabeth. They're conspiring, Maria gasped. We didn't even think about it, said her mother. But of course, the decision is yours. And I'll take it and agree. And you will not regret, quietly said the banker, kissing her on the temple. Steve's parents, his new bride, his future mother-in-law and stepdaughter, Harry's family, and the kindest Betty celebrated New Year's Eve. Oh, girls, I'm so happy for you, she said when she heard about the changes in Veronica's family. And the groom is good, and a wealthy one too. Our local ladies will swallow their tongues with envy. That's right, Veronica agreed. But for me, the main thing is my daughter's happiness. Although, of course, it's nice to rub their noses in it. Well, what am I saying? Maria and Isabella were dressing and decorating the salads. Steve said you were very beautiful, Isabella said and jokingly complained. But it turns out he was lying to us. You're unrealistically beautiful. You say that too, Maria smiled embarrassedly. I'm just ordinary. Well, no, objected her new friend. You are naturally beautiful. Steve chose you for a reason, and he had a choice, you know. Steve always said he wouldn't get married until he met the one he wanted, and now that moment has come. Our Steve is in love like a schoolboy, and you say she's ordinary. Steve, that's great, Harry said admiringly about his friend's future wife about an hour after the chimes and congratulations of the head of state. After my Isabella, of course. For the sake of such beauty, it was worth the wait, although some people have expressed the idea that the bride is as ugly as sin. So you've been hiding her from everyone. Let me guess who expressed such a thought, laughed Steve. Was it the incomparable Jessica? That's her, Harry confirmed. Apparently, she'd been hoping to be Steve's mistress until the last moment. The banker summarized, and the friends laughed. The young banker's parents were also delighted with their future daughter-in-law. She's nice, Louise approved, and she has a cute little girl. I loved her at first sight. But I hope you'll have children together. Of course we will, assured the son. Look me, Victor said, and having calculated something in his mind, jokingly wagged his finger. So that in the coming year we'll have a boy. Time is patient. Yes, Steve saluted cheerfully. Do you like soap operas? Louise asked the future relative sternly. I love it, Veronica confessed. That's our man, approved the in-law. So we'll watch soap operas together. So we will, smiled the mother of the bride, not yet fully believing that her daughter will be fine. She wanted to believe that Steve would not hurt the girl. The man seems not bad, but who knows what will happen next. In March, Steve and Maria got married. To the great disappointment of socialists, the famous banker decided not to make a spectacle of their marriage for the beau monde. Future spouses invited relatives, some of their friends and classmates and colleagues. Both were assured that happiness loves silence, and all the lionesses tigresses let elsewhere walk their hats and dresses. As a wedding gift, the banker presented Maria some papers decorated with a pink ribbon. What is it? She asked, puzzled. And this, my dear, the founding documents for the beauty salon, the owner of which you are now. Me? Maria exclaimed, stunned. What kind of beauty salon owner am I? Well, you're no worse than anyone else, Steve remarked. Take the young wife of the CEO of a new construction company. All she's got is legs from her ears and fake blonde curls, but she runs a boutique. She's as smart as a canary, and yet there she is. That's encouraging. Exactly, he encouraged her. So, Maria, be brave. Everything will work out for you. Well, and then do not forget about my humble person. You know I'll always help. I know, with a happy smile, nodded without 5 minutes, wife. Well, and now my wedding present. I hope you like it. Maria took out an oblong velvet case from her purse and held it out to Steve. And what is this? Better. When Steve opened the case, he raised his eyebrows in bewilderment, but when he realized what it was, he grabbed his fiancée and started circling the room. In the case was a pregnancy test showing 2 stripes. This really is more precious than gold and diamonds combined, the banker whispered, kissing Maria. When he heard a car pull up to the house, he said, "Here comes our limousine. Well, let's go towards happiness." Yes, onward and onward to happiness. Happiness didn't last long. 2 years after the couple had a son, Tom, they moved into a new 2-story mansion with a swimming pool and many buildings from the security room to the movie room. It was an entire residence. Seeing a picture of the house on the internet, Steve was immediately interested and the same day arranged a meeting with a realtor. And when the banker came to see the house, he noted that in reality it is even more beautiful than on the photo. The mansion, located on the other side of the city, was a gift to his beloved wife to the 3rd wedding anniversary. Sometime after the move, Maria again pleased her husband with the news of an addition to the family. The couple had a daughter, Karina. "To even the score is not enough one more guy," said Steve. "Well, what a year." Veronica moved into the old house after much persuasion. "What am I going to do here alone in such a huge house?" the old lady said. "Mom, well, at least in your old age you will live normally," said Maria. "Well, what keeps you in this extinct village? Insane neighbors? And here you'll receive grandchildren, garden and cultivate a vegetable garden. If you want, you can take Aunt Betty with you. After Uncle Tony's funeral, she still can't get over it, and the kids are far away." "That's true," Veronica sighed. "They were so loving. I was always envious of them. Besides, she'd done so much for us once." Betty gladly accepted her friend's invitation, and from then on they lived together. The older women gardened, baked pies, and sold them to the catering companies. "You're good, of course, but why beat your legs when we have Harry?" Steve said one day. "Bake your own pies and donuts, and Harry's driver will take them to the restaurant." The energetic old lady signed a contract with Harry's, and their business took off. A year later, the ladies of venerable age were awarded a diploma for contribution to business development. Banker Steve decided to try himself in a new field and, having sold the bank, created a logistics company from scratch. Maria successfully managed a beauty salon and was thinking about a branch. "And you said, 'I cannot,'" teased her husband. "You are my modesty." Elizabeth enjoyed babysitting small, as she called Tom and Karina, and still dreamed of a career as a female banker. Steve was flattered. After all, it was his stepdaughter who had made the decision. Steve was sure that this girl would succeed. The 18th birthday of this eldest daughter was celebrated with a big bash. "Our Elizabeth deserves no other," said the stepfather, and the parents began to prepare for the celebration of adulthood. From early morning, the servants worked so hard that a beehive would be jealous. They licked the mansion and grounds, polished the best dishes, took the tables and chairs out into the yard. When balloons and flowers were brought, the servants hustled even more actively. The celebrant went to the beauty parlor. A stunning dress, sewn to order, hung in the closet and waited for its time. Tom and Karina were on vacation, and now the brother and sister were merrily running around the grounds, making a mess and disturbing the servants. This year, Elizabeth had successfully completed her first year at the Institute of Commerce and Law, where her stepfather had studied. She, as Steve once did, never changed her decision. The girl chose the Department of Banking and went to her dream. "I want a red diploma," Elizabeth said decisively after the summer session. "So what's the problem?" encouragingly smiled stepfather. By the way, the girl never considered Steve a stepfather. He became a father to Elizabeth on that memorable day when he picked them up with her grandmother on the highway in a snowstorm. Yes, and Steve called Elizabeth his daughter and made a lot of noise in the business community. In the internet and yellow publications appeared notes about the illegitimate daughter of the banker Steve. At first, Steve was discouraged, but then he laughed merrily. "Well, so what? It's not like they were lying. Elizabeth really is my daughter. And anyway, I don't care what they write. The gossip columnists want to eat too." The first to arrive were the elderly businesswoman. The ladies arrived in a miniature foreign car, driven by Veronica. "I hope they'll let me spend the night." The old lady asked with feigned strictness and winked at her daughter and son-in-law. In honor of the first granddaughter's coming of age, I intend to drink thoroughly. No problem, smiled son-in-law. There are no problems with sleeping places. Where is the birthday girl? Betty asked. And the birthday girl is preparing to present herself to the guests in all her glory, Maria proudly explained. The Harry family had arrived by cab. Their only offspring, Jacob, was the young man of the birthday girl. Upon learning about it, the parents of the boy and the girl came to the delight. I never dreamed of a better girl for my son, said Isabella. Well, chuckled Harry, what are their years? They're still learning, getting back on their feet. But I'd be delighted if Elizabeth were to become our daughter-in-law. Yes, she said dreamily. It would be great if they went all the way together. Let's hope for the best, the businessman concluded. Jacob was holding a huge bouquet of roses in a branded package. Where's Elizabeth? He asked after the greetings. Patience, only patience, young man, said the prospective mother-in-law cheerfully. Her Highness is preparing for a solemn exit and asks not to be disturbed. The people were pulling up. The courtyard was filling up with relatives, friends, classmates from the new school, and fellow students. And then the music played, and the birthday girl came out of the mansion to the applause of the guests. Elizabeth looked like a picture from a fashion magazine. The golden tight dress emphasized her slender, girlish figure and beautifully shaded her fresh honey-colored skin, dark hair, and eyes. A waterfall of brown hair flowed spectacularly down her back, shimmering in the sunset rays. And a small tiara completed the festive image. Well, just like a princess, clapped her hands Veronica. Queen, objected son-in-law. Jacob came out to meet Elizabeth and, kneeling on one knee, handed her a bouquet, which caused a new explosion of applause. The guests presented Elizabeth with gifts, and then everyone enjoyed the meal. After toasts to the celebrant, parents, and grandparents, the head of the family asked for a moment of attention. And now the highlight of the festive program, solemnly announced Steve. Elizabeth, go to the father. The girl obeyed, and her father took out of his pocket a silk scarf and blindfolded her eyes. What's that for? Elizabeth said with a laugh. It's the right thing to do, Steve answered and led her along. Can I come with you? My mother-in-law asked. Nope, you'll see for yourself. How far are we going? Elizabeth asked. No, we're already there. Watch out for the step. Steve warned and picked Elizabeth up in his arms. When Steve set the girl on the floor and removed her blindfold, she couldn't hold back a gasp of amazement. Father and daughter were in the garage, and right in front of them stood a brand new bright red opal decorated with a giant snow-white bow. Is it for me? Exclaimed the girl in amazement. Well, since I brought you here, it's for you, laughed Steve, satisfied with the effect. Please drive. I'm afraid. Elizabeth protested. How about you? What are you afraid of, you fool? Well, you've been to driving school, haven't you? I did. And if I get behind the wheel now, the triumph will be incomplete. Don't you agree? Anyway, don't argue with your father. Get in. I'm so nervous, my daughter confessed. Don't be afraid, I'm with you. Seeing the culprit behind the wheel of a beautiful car, the guests again began to applaud. Welcome to the ranks of car ladies, shouted Alice, Elizabeth's institute friend. Well done, Elizabeth, Jacob exclaimed. Darling, I'm proud of you. Elizabeth got out of the car, bowed to the guests, and took her seat next to her boyfriend. After they had eaten, the guests wanted to dance and have fun. Steve and Maria stood embraced and looked at the summer starry sky with a smile, decorated with colorful lights. We have raised great kids, right? Steve said quietly, watching the beautiful birthday girl and Tom and Karina dancing dashingly among the young people. I agree, but that's not all, replied his wife cryptically. Well, of course, not all, he agreed. Tom and Karinka are still, in fact, small, and Elizabeth is still learning. That's true, but that's not what I mean. What is it? Steve asked, puzzled. Oh, I don't know how to say it. Well, you better say it somehow, now that you've started. Well, Steve, I'm pregnant, Maria blurted out. Wow, that's a surprise. Aren't you happy? She asked sadly. I realize I'm not young anymore, but it just happened. Young? Steve exclaimed. You'll be young to me when you're 90 years old and shuffling around on a gurney. Brr, what a horrible prospect. Maria shuddered and, unable to bear it, laughed till she cried. And what will you be like then? Also on a gurney, holding his stomach, cheerfully said his husband. Elizabeth and Jacob came up to them. What's the occasion? The daughter asked. My father and I imagined ourselves at 90, Maria said, wiping away her tears. And you, Tom, and Karina will have a brother or sister, Steve added. Elizabeth looked at her mother incredulously. Mom, is it true? It's true, Elizabeth, Maria nodded. That's great, exclaimed the girl, hugging her parents. This is news. I will practice on a brother or sister. Let's go to the table. This calls for a drink. Tom, Karina. Steve looked at the beautiful girl and remembered the little girl begging for help that December day. Everything in this life is connected, he thought. Steve realized he hadn't discovered America, but he knew. It never hurts to make sure of it once again. After all, it means that a person lives.
Good, then go to bed, was fine with her mother. She calmly sat down by the window and drank the aromatic tea. The woman was very worried about her daughter, that she could make mistakes in life. But at the same time, she never tried not to pry into her soul. And so, when the 9th grade came to an end, and all the boys gathered in the city, Elizabeth, not to say that she wanted it very much, went to get an education. And the girl, along with the rest, went to enroll. As soon as they arrived, she and Olivia decided that they would attend the same college. What if I don't get in? Elizabeth told her. She didn't want to go where her friend wanted her to go. What are you talking about? What if you don't get in? She didn't understand. You're the mega brain, and I'm who, with a C to a C, somehow got a certificate, smiled Elizabeth. She did not want to hide it from anyone, because she realized that everything depended only on her. If she had studied, she would have gotten the same grades as Olivia. But strangely enough, both girls had gotten in, and now they were moving into the dormitory. They hadn't even been home once, Elizabeth grumbled. Why are you all bickering? Home? You have not yet profited there. Did not understand her friend. I miss my mom. I miss my piglets, said the girl with nostalgia. What piglets? Her friend wrinkled her nose. From the first day, Olivia started spending all the money her parents gave her, or she received a scholarship on different things. Naturally, she bought them at the market because she didn't have enough for other things. But still, she was fashionable. Studying was going on. Elizabeth was bored. If you don't want to learn it, then why sit in the dorm? Come with us, Olivia told her. All the students, while it was warm, were outside. They gathered in groups, went to discos and clubs. What if I don't want to? Elizabeth told her. Well, you don't want to, so you will. Where are you going to look for a guy? Asked her friend. You know, as smart people say, happiness will find you on the stove, she answered Olivia. Well, first of all, we have no stove here. And secondly, water does not flow under the lion's stone, she parried. All right, I know you're smart, Elizabeth laughed to placate her friend. The day she met Austin, right after school, Olivia had dragged her shopping. You're not going to buy anything there anyway. Elizabeth didn't want to do that. It was her least favorite thing to do. What difference does it make? Let's just go and look, she pulled her. And Elizabeth had to follow her friend, listening to what she chirped about fashion and other things. It was so painful. After the hardest shopping trip, Elizabeth was so tired, she wanted nothing more than to just go to her dorm, lie on her bed, and fall asleep. But Olivia didn't think so. So, let's go to the cafe and have some tea or coffee, she told the girl. Let's go to the dorm. We have tea and coffee there, Elizabeth said in a tired voice. Shit, you're so boring. Olivia looked away from her. Okay, let's go, Elizabeth said forcefully. They went into the cafe and ordered. When they were sitting at the table, they were brought tea. They did not order anything for it because they had no money at all. At some point, a young guy came up to them. Hi, girls, he said. Hi, Olivia perked up. Why are you sitting with just tea? He looked at their table. Just thought we'd come in for a hot drink. What can't we do? Olivia spoke and Elizabeth turned away to the window, silent the whole time. I'm Austin, he told them cheerfully. I'm Olivia, and this is my friend Elizabeth, the girl answered for everyone. Can I join you? He asked casually. Sit down, Olivia shrugged, and Austin sat down next to Elizabeth. He went to the counter and got himself some tea and some desserts. Here my treat, he said, realizing that they were students, and those were always short on money. The girls saw that the guy was a few years older than them, but it didn't make any difference. Olivia sat and tried her best to please the young man, but he paid no attention to her. "Why is your friend so quiet?" he told her. "Ask her." Olivia realized she had nothing to catch here. "No problem," he smiled and turned to Elizabeth. "You don't have to ask me anything. If you want to talk, but I just want to be quiet," she said. "Oh, how impertinent we are." The boy laughed again. "Olivia, enough tea. Let's go home." The girl got up from the table and headed for the exit. Austin took another sip and followed them. "Wait," he shouted to them. All the way, he and Olivia chirped about something. Elizabeth walked on, thinking that she would never listen to her friend again and would never go anywhere with her. When they were already at the entrance to the dormitory, Austin took her hand. "Come on, let go of me." She looked at him. "Okay, I get it. I'll leave you two alone," Olivia said, and went inside. "Elizabeth, I'd like to get to know you better," Austin told her. I know, she wanted to take her hand away and follow her friend. "Why are you like this? Look how cheerful your friend is." He didn't understand. As it is, she managed to pull her hand out of his, and she left. As they say, forbidden fruit is sweet, and from that moment, Austin began to come to the dorm, and almost every day he called Elizabeth, sometimes asking Olivia to help. The guy had nothing, so he had little to offer, but he still made some surprises, gifts. "Elizabeth, look at the guy who's courting you. What more do you want?" Olivia said to her in the room. "Yes, I already see," was not very standard her answer this time. "Yeah, so you're okay with it?" "I don't know, at first I was blowing him off, but now I'm kind of ashamed," she said. "There is nothing shameful. Tomorrow, when he comes, you go for a walk together, there and talk." Spoke like a teacher roommate. "All right," agreed Elizaveta. She had long thought of Austin not as an annoying young man, but as someone who had a backbone and wouldn't back down from what he set out to accomplish. Elizabeth had no idea the first time she went on a serious date with Austin that she would have a very different life for the next few years. "Elizabeth, I rented an apartment. Now we will live together," he told her when the girls came to the second year of study. "That is, for 2 months you did not answer me, did not call, did not do anything, and now you say that you rented an apartment for us." She looked at him resentfully. The girl already thought that they had broken up a long time ago. When she went on vacation to the village, he promised to come, then to call, but he never did. "Come on, I have my own life here, friends, worries." He began to mutter something under his nose. "Concerns," she grinned, but just like last time, Austin didn't let it go. He pursued the girl again, and at some point she gave in again. "So are you moving in or not?" Olivia kept asking her. "We are," Elizabeth answered nervously. "That's good, Elizabeth. I never thought you'd start living an adult life with a guy before me." Her friend came up to her and hugged her. "Come on, it remains to be seen whether we will live together or not." Elizabeth thought about it too. And now she and Austin were in a separate apartment. If you compare it with the dormitory, now you can do everything. Not to run to the dormitory by 11, not to be afraid of the janitor or something else. "Let's go, I'll introduce you to my friends," a young man once told her. "Okay," she answered him. And from that moment on, Elizabeth's life began to change. They drove up to some country house, where a large company gathered. Austin talked to everyone very well. It was obvious that he was not the last person here. The party was going great. Elizabeth didn't even expect to enjoy it so much. "So, how did you like adulthood?" Austin asked her one day. "And what is the difference between adulthood and childhood?" She laughed in response. The girl was different now. If Olivia had seen her, she wouldn't have recognized her. Elizabeth had stopped talking to her for some reason. She began to be friends with Mitch's company, and now every weekend, either they went to their new friends or they were visiting them. At first, Olivia would call and take offense, and then she stopped doing that too. Elizabeth didn't seem to care either. Austin was doing something, he had money, so the girl was very well with him. She rarely saw her mother now, and sometimes she could call her during the week, but somehow she was not up to it all the time. Shallow life so tightened that Elizabeth already did not remember how she lived without it and did not go anywhere. "Hello everyone." They came to the very country house where she had first met young men and girls. "Elizabeth, come in." Her friends were already waiting for her. So, little by little, Austin began to linger somewhere in the company. He came home drunk more and more often. Elizabeth resented him because she had dropped out of school. Now she was sitting at home doing nothing. Why not take her with him or let her go with the girls? The young man was getting angrier and angrier every time she started lecturing him. He could drink at home lately too. Elizabeth did not even think that in 2 years a person could change dramatically. Give me something to eat. He'd come home drunk again. You're the one who needs to cook, she snapped at him. What did you just say? He didn't understand what he heard. She didn't want to talk to him and went to her room. Austin jumped up from his seat, running after her. The girl didn't expect him to hit her, but apparently Austin didn't think so. Did you get it? He glared at her. You what? She held her face, her cheek burning from the slap. You'll know how to be rude to me. He turned around and left for the kitchen, there to continue his fun. The next day when he left, that's when Elizabeth remembered, both about Olivia and her mother. She wanted to complain to someone now, but whichever of her new friends she called, they all had something to do. She dialed Jenny's number. Daughter, hello, she heard on the phone. Elizabeth cried because she realized that no matter how she felt about her mother, she would always accept and understand her. Mom, he hit me, the girl cried into the phone. Come on, pack your things and run away from him, the woman said. Maybe wait and see, after all, he was not himself. Elizabeth doubted it. She realized that she had to live somewhere, and she didn't work. She didn't study. The money was only Austin's. Well, I don't know what you want to accomplish with this. Her mother was against her staying with this young man. While they were talking, the girl heard keys being inserted into the keyhole. She quickly said goodbye and went into the kitchen. Today she put the meat in to make broth. She wanted to make borscht for Austin. See, she understood, and she said don't. She could see he was out of sorts again. Austin, have you been up all morning? She didn't understand. Get away from me, he shouted. Elizabeth did not argue with him, went to the kitchen. Then she peeled vegetables, fried, boiled, and at this moment cried. How her life could turn 180 degrees. For a week or two everything was fine. Elizabeth had been meaning to call Olivia for a long time, to ask her how she was doing, since it had been so long since they had seen each other. And now she dared, dialing her number. What, you want to make up? She asked her. We'd have not quarreled with you, Elizabeth told her. If you want come, we are now in a cafe, just and sit together, said her childhood friend. Everyone wait, I will definitely come. She did not call Austin, but wrote in a message that she went to meet her friend. She didn't think he would say or do anything. Olivia, hi. She walked into the cafe. The girlfriends hugged. They walked to a table, sat down. The girl introduced Elizabeth to the others. And she didn't care where and with whom she was sitting now. The main thing was to distract herself from what was happening in her family. Well, I hope we will not lose contact with you now, said her friend. No, of course not. Elizabeth was sure of it. They sat until closing time and then went home. Elizabeth entered the apartment. She did not expect it, but immediately received a blow to the face. The girl realized that it was useless to say anything. Elizabeth tried to somehow get into the bedroom so that Austin would not touch her again. Where to? He grabbed her by the hair. He was in such a state today that he could barely stay on his feet. Let go. She tried to break free of him, thinking that since he was like this, she would be able to overpower him. Let go. Yes, please. He pushed her. She fell to the floor. What are you doing? Stop it. She couldn't get up. Stop. Austin stood over her. When did you become like this? She sobbed. Where have you been? He kicked her with each word. The girl only had time to cover her face with her hands so he wouldn't hit her there. How she screamed that night was impossible, and her roommate didn't care about that scream. He did not stop in his torture until Elizabeth became quiet and stopped moving. After that, he went into the kitchen, drank some more, and then went into the room, flopped down on the sofa and snored. In the morning, as if nothing had happened, Austin got up, went into the kitchen. Everything was on the table. All he had to do was splash himself into a glass and drink. As he tilted the glass and the liquid burned his lips, he noticed out of the corner of his eye that one wall had been smeared with something red. He sipped the glass aside, turned around. Elizabeth, as she had been on the floor yesterday, was still there. He went over to her. Elizabeth, 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 Elizabeth. He beat her on the cheeks, but the girl was unconscious. The mother was squeezing the last juices out of herself. She was doing a lot of things around the house, household chores, also had time to work, and now she decided that she had to sell chickens or pigs to make money. Jenny did what she could for her daughter. "Elizabeth, I can't sell the last pig," she said to her daughter. "Mommy, of course you can't. Christopher was almost 2 years old by this time. You could put him in daycare." "What are we gonna do?" They sat down together at the table. "Listen, if you agree, then stay here with Christopher. Let him go to kindergarten, and I'll go back to the city, find some work there. Anyway, the salary is higher than here," Elizabeth suggested to her. "Daughter, you should be careful there somehow," remembered her mother last time she went there. "Mom, don't even remember," Elizabeth begged her. As hard as it was, the son had to be parted from her mother too. And so, Elizabeth went again to the same town where she had lived for several years. She had a little money and rented a room for the first time. She got a job wherever she could find one. She had no education, so she worked as a waitress, technician, dishwasher, wherever she was called, she went there, as long as the money was paid. Once in the restaurant after the shift, Elizabeth went outside, and while she was saying goodbye to the girls and was about to leave, she heard a familiar voice. She realized it was Olivia. It was embarrassing, but she couldn't help but talk to her friend. "Olivia, hi." She saw them from a distance. "Elizabeth?" She stood there looking at her and couldn't believe they were seeing each other again. "I didn't expect to see you here either," the girl told her. "Are you resting?" Olivia asked her. "I'm working," as embarrassing as it was to realize it was true. "Come with us," Olivia asked her. "Oh, let's not today, we'll call later, and then we'll meet sometime." Elizabeth was exhausted. "Come on, not today." They said goodbye. Elizabeth went home. Olivia back to the restaurant. And the very next day in the evening, Olivia called her childhood best friend. They agreed to meet tonight. It was in the park. It was chilly outside, but the girls didn't notice because they were telling each other who lived where and how. Elizabeth didn't say much about herself because Olivia was always talking. It turned out that she had found a young man too. They were already preparing for the wedding, but just before the event, the girl found out that he was not faithful to her. "That's how they split up," she said. "Well, let's split up. And when I have a weekend, we'll meet again," Elizabeth offered her. "I don't mind," Olivia smiled, and they hugged like they had when they were kids, said goodbye, and went home. Now they met almost every weekend when Elizabeth had time. They went to cabs and other places of entertainment. Olivia was always the initiator, and she dragged Elizabeth everywhere with her. "I don't know how you'll do it, but we have to go to the club on Saturday," Olivia told her. "I don't even know," Elizabeth wasn't a fan of skipping work. "No way, everyone will be there, some famous artist is coming, we have to be there." Olivia looked at her with big eyes. "Okay, I agree," replied Elizabeth. The next day, when she was at work, she talked to her bosses. They let her go without any problems because she never missed her shifts. And now, she was sitting at home in front of the mirror and didn't know what to wear. But she decided that there was nothing to think about. There were only a few outfits in the closet. "Elizabeth, where are you?" Olivia called her. "I'm on my way," she answered the phone. They were supposed to meet at a friend's house to get ready. Since the girls' financial situation was unstable, they decided to have a few drinks and snacks at home so that they could come to the club prepared. "So, we have a couple of hours, and then we have to be at the club." Olivia looked at her watch. "Oh, who do you want to meet at that club? Do you think there's anyone normal there?" Elizabeth thought back to her past married life, and she didn't want that to happen again. "Oh, come on," Olivia was hurt. "And what from your stories? I realized that no matter how many young men you met, everyone was either married or had some kind of problem," Elizabeth said to her in response. They called a cab, went outside, got into the car, and drove to the club. The music was playing loudly there, which seemed to Elizabeth to be hitting her ears. "Let's go straight to the bar," Elizabeth suggested, at which point Olivia gave her a look that made her friend uncomfortable. "Wow," she shook her head. "What's the big deal? We'll order cocktails. Why do we need a table?" She didn't understand. Indeed, Olivia agreed with her now. They asked to make them cocktails and stood and watched what was happening in the hall. Young people were not only dancing, some of them were trying to show off in front of everyone, making some intricate moves, but it was the custom here that no one paid attention to anyone. "Look," Olivia showed Elizabeth one of the young men. "Yeah," she nodded, realizing who she meant. "I want to meet him. Will you help me?" Olivia began to fuss. She didn't know how, but she was sure that today she had to leave this place with this man. Well, of course, what should be done? Was ready for everything, friend. When the young man was near the counter itself, Olivia went on the attack. Push accidentally my glass so that it falls between us, she asked her friend. Okay, she agreed. And when the guy was very close, Olivia started to take the phone and elbowed her friend's glass. It fell on the bar, the liquid spilled. Naturally, the guy couldn't help but notice. Oh, forgive me, please, Olivia immediately told him. She came over, got some napkins, started wiping off the bar, and wanted to help him. No need, I'll do it myself, he told her. Again, excuse me, she looked at him with eyes that made him freeze for a second. Yeah, that's okay, he laughed at that point. My name is Olivia, she said. Mine's Alvin, he replied. Very nice. Though Olivia was near him, she realized he wasn't near her at all. Then she turned back to her friend. I had to speak very loudly and almost in her ear because the music was playing so loudly. I wish I had a handsome boy like that, she said to Elizabeth. Are you sure he's handsome? She laughed back. Are you blind? Olivia turned to Alvin again. At that moment their gazes met because he was standing there looking at her. She immediately turned away and spoke quietly to Elizabeth to refuse to dance when she called for her. Then Olivia turned back to the bar, ordering another cocktail for herself. Can I pay for it? The young man perked up at that moment. Of course, the girl was doing everything she could to get his attention. Elizabeth, let's go dancing, she said. Oh, today somehow I'm not in the mood, the girl said naively. She only did what she did to hold back a smile. Come dance with me, said the young man. With pleasure, Olivia answered him, and they went to the dance floor. Her friend stood near the bar. She finished her cocktail, watched her dancing with the young man, and was happy for her that everything had turned out so well. She decided that if her friend didn't want to go home now, she would definitely head there. With that question in mind, she approached Olivia. I'm leaving, she said. Where to? The girl was surprised. Home. I have nothing to do here. You're having fun, and I can't have that kind of fun, Elizabeth told her honestly. Well, all right, Olivia turned to Alvin, looking for approval in his gaze or words. Why are you looking at me like that? He smiled, at which point Elizabeth thought he was really cute. You will walk me out, won't you? She asked him. Of course, he answered her. That's it, then call a cab. Don't walk, Olivia asked Elizabeth. I'll handle it myself. The girl turned around and headed for the exit. Bye, shouted her friend after her. Elizabeth walked outside. It was nice out, and even though it was already night, she decided to walk. She walked along the almost deserted streets and thought about her life. Suddenly the brakes squealed. The car stopped a few centimeters away from Elizabeth. She didn't even notice how she stepped out onto the roadway. Are you sick of living? Jumped out of the driver's seat and started yelling at the girl. Sorry, I was thinking, and did not notice how I came out here. She stood and looked with frightened eyes at the young man. He walked around the car, looked to see if she was okay, then got back behind the wheel. Elizabeth turned around and walked out onto the sidewalk, shaking all over. She realized she could be on her way to the hospital right now. Girl, excuse me. The same car pulled up beside her. What? She turned and looked at the driver. I'm sorry, he said simply and smiled. Ah, yes, it's all right, she went on, and he drove slowly beside her. Want a ride? He looked back and forth at the road, then at her. No thanks, I'll walk. She didn't want to bother a stranger. Wait, he stopped the car, ran out of the car, and approached her. Again, I apologize, she didn't look at him. Why are you always apologizing? I almost hit you, he smiled. It's okay, she repeated for the umpteenth time. Let's go. He nudged her lightly toward the car. Elizabeth didn't resist now. She gave in to his entreaties, even though she knew it was wrong to do so. Already, when she was sitting in the car, she thought, what if it was all a setup, and he wanted to lure her that way? But it was too late. Girl, she heard through her thoughts. Oh yes, what? She turned around. My name is John. He couldn't stop smiling. Elizabeth, she too strained to smile. Where are we going? He looked at the road. Elizabeth gave the address. They reached the place quickly. They were silent the whole way. Thank you. She got out of the car. You're welcome, though. He got out after her. What? The girl didn't understand what he wanted from her. Can you give me your phone number? Call me Mimi. He didn't insist. I do not even know, embarrassed Elizabeth. If you do not want to communicate, I will not pester, he promised. The girl herself did not know what attracted her to this young man, but she dictated to him her numbers. After she went home, she did not want anything, not even to think, just went to bed. When she was on shift the next day, her phone rang. An unfamiliar number was on the screen. Elizabeth quickly took off her gloves, answered it. "Hi, it's John," he said cheerfully. "I'm sorry, I'm not comfortable talking right now," she practically whispered. "Why?" He switched to a whisper as well. "At work," Elizabeth replied. "Tell me the address, and when you're free, I'll come over," he practically insisted today. It was easier for Elizabeth to say all that than to bicker and wait for someone to notice. In the evening when she went out, the guy was already waiting for her. She walked over, got in the car. They drove off. The girl thought that he was about to start pestering her with questions about why she worked here and everything else, but John was silent. "Home?" He turned around. "Yes," she nodded and looked embarrassed. "Will we ever meet up again?" John asked her. "I don't know," she shrugged. "When's your day off?" He seemed to know everything. The day after tomorrow. She wouldn't lie, even though they didn't talk. She felt cozy with this man. "Agreed, I'll call you tonight, and then I'll stop by again tomorrow to take her home." He took care of her. "Thank you, and yesterday she got out of the car." "Bye. See you tomorrow." He stayed behind the wheel today. Elizabeth walked into the house. If yesterday there were no abricate thoughts, today for some reason she thought about him, her new acquaintance. He is handsome, well-dressed, on an expensive car, and she, a simple dishwasher. Different thoughts were in her head. Elizabeth, hi. On the morning of Elizabeth's day off, Olivia called her. "How are you doing?" She asked her because she knew her friend couldn't wait to tell her about her new acquaintance. "Oh, you have no idea. I just came from Alvin." Elizabeth felt her friend blush. "So, you're doing well?" The girl hurried to finish the conversation, because it was now John was supposed to call. "Yeah," Olivia stopped talking. "You're a little wordy," surprised her friend, because before Olivia could not shut her mouth. "I wanted to get together, and I see you don't want to." The girlfriend took offense again. "Let's do it some other time," Elizabeth asked. "Okay," didn't say goodbye and ended the conversation. Olivia. John didn't call until an hour later, saying he was waiting for her outside her house. Elizabeth was already ready. She walked down in the car. "Hello," he looked at her. "Hello," she was cheerful. She didn't know why. At that moment, Elizabeth didn't know what to say. So many thoughts immediately appeared in her head. Why does he live in rented accommodation? What, he doesn't have enough money? If he can afford such a car, could buy an apartment, at least take a loan, but decided to keep silent and say nothing. "All right," she answered. They talked about something else. Elizabeth translated the conversation, and when the young man left, she immediately dialed Olivia. "Have you seen the time, friend?" she asked her. "Listen, Olivia, today you ask why we are still not together. He proposes, but with all his glamour, for some reason lives in a rented apartment and calls me to live there," Elizabeth shared with her. "You know, most likely he is married." Made an assumption, friend. "Why do you think so?" Elizaveta did not understand the connection between a rented apartment and a wife. "Well, as a man with status, has a wife, maybe even children, and you call you to live in a rented apartment. It is clear that he has a house or living space in the property, and in order not to offend you, and do not go to you in the communal room, so he offers to move to him on rented," she reasoned. Elizabeth had enough of this one conversation with her friend to get these thoughts into her head. She had a shift the next day and the day after that too, so they didn't see John. Elizabeth, however, had a handful of various thoughts about him. "Hi." They met when she had another day off. "John, I don't want there to be any misunderstandings between us. Let's clear things up here and now." She got into the car and didn't even say a word of greeting to him. "Okay, talk. I don't have any secrets from you." He didn't look her in the eyes for some reason. "Tell me, why are you asking me to live in a rented place?" She asked him a question and immediately felt her cheeks start to blush. "I don't understand. What kind of question?" He furrowed his brow. "Your car is worth as much as 2 apartments in this city. Why couldn't you buy an apartment and chose a car?" She started from afar. "What's the connection?" Just like Elizabeth asked Olivia that once. "Okay, I won't beat around the bush. Are you married?" She asked him a direct question. "What?" He laughed. I don't see what's so funny. She looked him in the eye. Elizabeth, how could I meet you so often? How many evenings we spent together, he told her. Let's go to your place, she said and buckled her seatbelt. Let's go, he didn't mind. Elizabeth thought, now if they arrive, she will definitely see everything, whether it is his apartment or he rented it on purpose, and generally understand everything. When they entered the apartment, she saw a framed picture of John with an older woman. It was clear that it was a relative, either his mom or his aunt. Things stacked up in the closet. There were some little things lying around here and there. Well, he couldn't have done all this on purpose because he didn't know she was going to visit him today. Elizabeth went to the kitchen, looked where the kettle was, poured water, put it on to boil. She sat down at the table. Tell me, do you really have any feelings for me? The young man asked her. Why are you asking me this question, don't you know? She looked at him. Today you was somehow different. If usually he smiled, laughed, joked. Today he sat in front of her very serious. Okay, I'm going to tell you one thing now, because of which you just might leave me. He stood up and started walking around the kitchen. If you're not married, nothing else can stop me, she said. No, I am definitely not married. You can check my passport, any other documents, and my friends will prove it to you if you start talking to them, he said seriously. Then what? She couldn't understand. In fact, I do not have an overcoat car, overcoat clothes, and in general, nothing. Now he looked into her eyes, and she realized that the guy was telling the truth. But how could it be? After all, she sees all this and has been driving this car for months now, talking to him. How could that be possible? She was waiting for a detailed explanation now, because she was afraid that her previous history with Austin might repeat itself. Don't think anything of it. I haven't stolen anything. I haven't cheated anyone. If only a little, John said. Well, please, don't be long. Tell me everything at once, and then everything will fall into place, she asked him. Well, listen, I'm an ordinary guy who came from a village, went to college, and then went to work. First, I was a security guard at a paid parking lot, and then I helped a man who turned out to be the head of a car dealership. He asked me to work there, John said, while Elizabeth was pouring tea. Are you sure you didn't steal that car? She laughed. Definitely not stolen. In the evenings, when the shift ends, I work part-time in the car service, and our boss during the day races on this car, and in the evening leaves it there, because he goes with a driver, John explained to her. Well, now at least something is clear, Elizabeth said. Are you going to talk to me after all this? He asked her. Of course I will. She put her arms around him and started kissing him. Tonight they had a fabulous night, and in the morning Elizabeth told him that she would move all her things to his place in the evening. Listen, they sat the next day in the common kitchen, because the girl was already a resident of this apartment too. Yeah, he was ready to hear her out. Do you think I would work in a restaurant as a dishwasher, waitress, or something else, if my life was good? The smile did not leave her face. What then? That's what he wanted to hear. Well, just like you, different problems. Right now she didn't want to tell him about Christopher because she didn't know how he would feel about it. Listen, I have an idea, John told her. I'm listening, she answered him. Why don't we go and live in the country? After she had told him how much she liked it there and everything else, he couldn't offer her anything else. What would we live on? She asked. I'll get a job, you two, even if it's not much, but money, household, it's your own. There's enough for everything, he assured her. I'd love to, but let's stay here a little longer, earn some money, save up, at least for the first time, and then we'll go, she agreed. Only you'll have to live with my mother. He smiled and looked at her. Is that a condition? She asked. No, and not even a question. He didn't know what to say, and she laughed at that moment. Is she normal? Elizabeth had heard a lot about mothers-in-law, but had never encountered it herself. She's a very kind woman. You'll definitely get along. And she has a huge house in the village, so there is enough room for everyone, and there will still be. He began to describe the place where he grew up. John, how do you feel about children? The girl asked him. Aubrey, he answered her. You mean you don't want kids? She clarified her question. You understand, now is such a time that a child is not enough to give birth. It must be brought up, raised, learned, and whether we can do it or not, I do not know, so why breed poverty? He took a sip of tea, stood up and went into the room, thereby showing Elizabeth that he finished the conversation. The girl understood everything. It was hurtful, but there was nothing she could do about it. Now they were both working. No one was going anywhere in any expensive cars. In the evening, they came home either on foot or by some other means of transportation. They put aside everything they earned. They didn't need much. And in a year and a half, they had accumulated a good amount of money, enough to live on for a few months, maybe even more. Well, I've already called my mom, said that we'll come to her. The young man told her. John, let's sign here, she asked him. I mean, like a fool, I bought a ring. I thought we'd come home, invite your mother, my mother, all together at the table. I'll get down on one knee, make you a proposal. You take this box, start jumping for joy. And here you yourself, John. Let's get married, of course. He hugged her, took out the box, and gave it to her. I don't want to be in the village. You have to get everyone together, get to know each other, socialize, and I'm not ready for that yet. Let's just sign, and if we have to, we'll have a wedding, she asked him. Of course, he agreed to everything. The very next day, they went to the registry office, filed an application. The date was set in a few weeks. All this time, they were still working. After, when they signed, they came home, happy, drank champagne. The next day, they had to go to the village. Tosh, can I ask you something? They were lying in bed in the evening. Sure, why do you keep asking it? He turned to her. Come on, you'll go to the village to your mom, and I'll go to mine. She was lying, looking at him and waiting for his reaction. Well, in principle I don't mind, he told her and kissed her. Then, it is agreed. While you prepare your mother, you will do everything at home. We will also have time to see each other, and I will come to you. After this arrangement, the young people quietly went to bed. Christopher ran Elizabeth along the path to the house and saw her son playing near the gate. Mommy, he turned to her. She had seen her son grow up. Even though Ginny had sent her pictures, she couldn't tell from them what she saw now. They entered the house, the mother setting the table as usual. She had been warned, so she was waiting for her daughter. They spent the whole day together, and after the boy was put to bed in the evening, Elizabeth came into the kitchen and sat down at the table. I see that a serious conversation is coming up, her mother told her. Yes, and you have no idea what kind. Elizabeth took out of her pocket a wedding ring and put it on her finger. What is it? The woman didn't understand. I got married, her daughter told her. When? The mother waited for an answer. Yesterday, Elizabeth laughed because the mother had a face like she was about to faint. Well, and who is he? The woman wondered. Mom, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. John and I met. I started to tell her their story and got to the present moment. Yeah, the woman was waiting for the rest of the story. You see, when I asked him what he thought about kids, he immediately, without even thinking, said he didn't want them. I'll be leaving in a week, and I want to leave Christopher with you for a while, she said, her eyes downcast, because she was ashamed of herself, both in front of her child and her mother. You'll come, won't you? Ginny asked her. Well, of course I will. There was no other answer. Go, my daughter, set up your personal life, and then you will slowly tell him that you already have a child, and you cannot get away from it, said her mother, as usual. Elizabeth hugged her because her mother understood, knew, and supported her. The week passed very quickly. Elizabeth had no time at all to communicate with the child. She was leaving and crying. Mommy, why are you crying? She had her son in her arms. Christopher will have to part again, but you don't cry, Mommy will be here soon. She kissed him and couldn't stop. She drove from one man she loved to another. John met her, gave her flowers, took her to his home, where his childhood, youth, and everything else had passed. Mom, where are you? They came home. Here I am, a woman's voice was heard. Well, hello, Snow, she said to her as she came out. Hello, Emma. They walked into the kitchen, which was very large compared to what it had been in Elizabeth's parents' house, sat down at the table. There was some awkward silence at first. Are you two just going to stare at each other? John asked them. Oh, no, we're just looking at each other, the woman said. She didn't initially want her sister-in-law to think anything bad about her. It's okay, I'm good to you two, and I don't want to quarrel or anything like that, the girl told her. They sat amicably at the table. Elizabeth really saw that John's mother is a good woman. The next morning, when the young man went to find out about the job, the girl got up early and prepared breakfast. You are my clever girl, the woman came out to her. Here, I wanted to please you and show that your son is in good hands, smiled daughter-in-law. Yes, I see, everything is fine, Emma said good-naturedly. After they had breakfast, Elizabeth cleared the table, washed the dishes, They went out into the yard. "Will you show me what you have here and how?" the girl asked the woman. Of course, they went through the yard. Here everything was a little different from what Elizabeth was used to. "Oh, and what is this?" She saw a stable. "What do you think?" smiled mother-in-law. "Are there horses in there?" Did not believe the girl. She had dreamed of these animals since childhood, but in their village they were only on the farm. "Yes, let's go." The woman was flattered that her daughter-in-law was so surprised. They went inside. There were only 4 horses. Elizabeth immediately approached one of them. "Careful, aren't you afraid?" Emma asked her. "Come on, how can you be afraid of them?" smiled Elizabeth. They spent a very long time here. In addition to the stable, there were other buildings, but mostly there were various birds. It was a woman's weakness. When the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law returned to the house, they began to cook together. The mother stood behind the stove, and the girl helped to peel vegetables. That's how it all worked out. "Come on." Emma rejoiced. She had never thought that there were such daughters-in-law. John came home. "So, how was your day?" he asked. "Excellent, especially, I like one place." His wife told him how she had been given an excursion. "It makes me happy, and I got a job," he said. "Let's get on with our lives." Elizabeth stretched. Her husband did not keep her here long. She went to their room and went to bed. After a month of living here, Elizabeth got bored. "I'll go and see if there are any workers needed." She wanted to leave the house. What is there to find out? They are needed everywhere. All the young people have moved away. Hands are needed everywhere, the woman told her. "Where exactly?" turned all allowed the girl. "At the post office," Emma shrugged. "Thank you." Did not wait, and Elizabeth immediately went there. And indeed, the local post office required a letter carrier. Yes, it's a thankless job, but it's not like being at home. "John, I'm working now too," she told her husband in the evening. Good, he didn't say anything. He had dinner, and then he and his wife went into the bedroom. "Shall I bring tea?" Elizabeth asked him when it was late and it was time to go to bed. Yes, he was lying in bed. The girl went to the kitchen, did everything, then returned to the room. When John was asleep, Elizabeth got up and began to dress. She quietly left the room and went outside. There, no longer afraid of waking anyone, she headed for the stables. The place beckoned to her. She could not go there in the afternoon or in the morning because she was working. Time passed. Life here seemed to Elizabeth like Groundhog Day. In the morning, everyone had breakfast. Then she and John went to work. She didn't know what her husband did during the day, but she ran around the village, delivering letters, telegrams, pensions. By evening, she was so tired that she fell off her feet, but Elizabeth knew almost all the people in the village. "How are you?" In the evening, her husband would ask her a dubious question, and that was it. Then she would go to her room to go to sleep. The only outlet were the horses, with whom you could talk, tell them everything Elizabeth thought about. "John, what's going on in our family? We haven't had much time together yet." One day she sat down to talk to him. "You know how tired I am," he complained to her. "And I am just as tired, but still have time to do a lot of things around the house, and your mom to help," said the girl. "Give me time to get used to it, and everything will be as before," he kissed his wife. When Elizabeth went to work the next day, she saw a young girl standing on the porch of the post office. "Hello," she approached her. "Hello, are you Elizabeth?" she asked her. Yes, everyone here knew her, so why the questions? "I've heard so much about you, so I came to meet you," the girl said cheerfully. At 9 o'clock in the morning, Elizabeth looked at the clock. "What difference does it make? I'm running to the store. The bread at home is out," the stranger behaved cheerfully. "Well, as my name you know, and you?" Elizabeth asked her. Aubrey extended her hand to the girl. "Please," they entered the post office building. Now Elizabeth had a girlfriend. They walked around in their free time chatting. "John, let's go to the disco on Saturday," the wife said to her husband. "You what? What disco?" He was very surprised. "What's the big deal? We're young. Why not go like old men sitting here at home?" "Did Aubrey sing in your ears?" For some reason, the young man started to get angry. "Why immediately Aubrey?" she just said, "and I'm offering you." She looked at him. "So go with Aubrey," he waved her away. "Beloved, if you're going to act like this, I'll just pack my things and leave you," the girl said. It wasn't the first night she smelled alcohol from him, but as long as he didn't do anything, she kept silent. "Okay, that's it. I'm sorry," he hugged her. So are you going to go?" she continued. I'm serious. Go with your girlfriend, have some fun. He had nothing against it. What do you mean with a girlfriend? Emma listened to them. Mom, at least you stay out of it, he grimaced. Fine, she and went to her room. Lately, Elizabeth began to notice that her mother-in-law had distanced herself from her as well. They didn't have the kind of communication they used to have. Tonight ended well. Well, what does John say? Her friend asked her the next day. Nothing, he said that we should go with you. Elizabeth did not deceive her, because she really wanted to get away. That's fine, she was glad. When Saturday came, the girls were at the club. Elizabeth was no longer a snotty girl. She had nothing to be embarrassed about, and she went straight to the middle of the room. Aubrey followed suit. The girls were having a blast. Can I ask you out? A young man approached Elizabeth at one point. Of course, I didn't think there was anything wrong with that. You're pretty. I've been watching you for a long time, Michael told her. He came to the village on weekends to visit his mother. Thank you, she was embarrassed. Can I invite you back later? He had agreed in advance for the next dance. Of course, today Elizabeth had a great day, and she did not want anything to spoil it. After the disco, Michael went to see her off. It was nice. For a long time the girl had not felt so much male attention. Bye, he looked at her near the gate where Elizabeth lived. Come on, next weekend we'll meet. She opened the gate, entered. Where were you? Stood the mother-in-law and looked with an unkind squint. What an interrogation. John knows everything, she smiled at Emma. Look at you dressed up, put on makeup. I saw how Michael walked you home, said her mother-in-law angrily. Today no one will spoil my mood. She went to the bedroom. From that day on, the woman did not let her daughter-in-law out of her sight. She saw her walking around the village in short skirts. Michael, who used to arrive on Saturday night and leave on Sunday morning, began to stay for longer periods of time. John, why are you so late again? She asked her husband when he stayed out late with friends again. Elizabeth, don't bother, he asked her. Okay, she folded her arms across her chest, and when her husband fell asleep, she would quietly leave the house again and go to the stables. Emma saw all this. She couldn't interfere. She was afraid of fighting with her son. She knew she wasn't running to the horses, but she kept quiet. The girl returned home when it was well past midnight. She quietly opened the doors to the house. On the threshold stood her mother-in-law. Jesus, Emma, she clutched at her heart. What, are you scared? She asked her. Unexpectedly, the girl said the truth. The time will come, and John will know everything, she told her. Find out what? She couldn't understand why things had changed so much in this family. That's it, the woman was leaving her. Crazy house, Elizabeth entered the bedroom, lay in bed. Sleep did not come. She began to think that she and her husband needed a vacation. To go away, to divorce, to forget everything that had been recently. The next morning, when John and his mother came out to breakfast, they did not recognize Elizabeth. The girl was in a beautiful dress, with light makeup. Wow, her husband walked up to her and kissed her. Trying hard, she smiled. Beautiful, he whispered in her ear. When he went outside, his wife hurried after him to talk. John, she took him under her arm. Now a beautiful young couple was walking through the village. What? He liked walking like that. Let's go somewhere and relax, at least in the city for the weekend, she asked him. You know, I can't do it now. I'll soon start working in the field. I need everything to be in order. She believed him, because he spoke with regret. I see, she said it in such a sad voice that John even stopped. Look, why don't you go to your mom's? He suggested to the girl. Okay, she immediately perked up. That's great, and we'll take a break from each other and divorce. He hugged her around the waist, and now they were walking like that. Are you tired of me? She asked. Well, why do you take everything so literally? Indignant husband, all Elizabeth, we agreed. He kissed her right outside the post office building and went on. At work, too, everyone noticed that Elizabeth looked different today, complimented her. Although today was Thursday, but Michael, for some reason, was in the village. He came to the post office with flowers. Colleagues even opened their mouths from such insolence. Michael, I'm leaving tomorrow, so I won't go to the disco, she told him. So that's who you're dressed up for, the boss told her. What nonsense, she left work early today. In the evening they had a nice evening. Elizabeth cooked dinner, everyone ate and went out. As soon as John was asleep, Elizabeth went back to the stables to tell the horses that she would be gone for a few days. Emma was on guard. She had already been told what was in the post office today. She decided that when the girl left, she would be sure to talk to her son. In the morning, John saw his wife off, went to work, and she prepared to meet her most dear people. Mommy, now Christopher was running towards her. Hello, my darling, she picked up her son. How good it was now Elizabeth, without suspicion, late husband, next to mom and son. Well, how is life with you? Jeannie asked. Everything is fine. Elizabeth did not want to upset the woman. She still believed that everything will work out with John. And Emma at that moment was waiting for her son from work. Aren't you going to have dinner? She asked the young man when he returned. Mom, how tired I am of all your suspicions in this talk. He waved her away. Are you blind or deaf? Do not hear what they say in the village. I tell you exactly. Till Michael went to town, stood the mother over the ear of her son. I know that Elizabeth is an honest and decent girl. She would not do such a thing. He could not change his mother's mind. I saw how this honest one twist her ass in front of everyone. The mother spoke almost with hatred about her daughter-in-law, with whom not so long ago she was so kindly communicating. Listen, just because Elizabeth was here, I used to come home, and now, he stopped talking. The woman realized it was best to get behind her son now. She quieted down for a while, but she didn't abandon her task of tracking down her daughter-in-law. Tell me why he does not believe me. She walks around, twisting her ass. She came to the neighbor with complaints. Oh, don't get involved. It's a young thing. They'll sort it out themselves, she advised her. I cannot, he worked in the city. Everything was fine. No, met this one, brought, and all, began to drink, almost crying woman. Well, I, of course, as a mother, you understand, silenced the neighbor, not knowing what else to say. All right, I'll bring her out into the open. Tell me what she needs there, in this stable. Why not in the hen house? Nowhere else, only goes there. And I'll tell you, because it's easier to hide there. Both herself and her lover, Emma said. When you catch her by the hand, then everyone will believe you. The neighbor shook her head. Say, and why they have no children? Yes, because John does not sleep with her. So she went to the left, and Michael, the dandy, saw a pretty girl, and all the same, Emma sighed. That's enough, go home, take a sedative and wait for your sister-in-law, she told her. Yeah, I'll go, it's late. The woman got up and left the neighbor's house. Strangely enough, but while Elizabeth was not in the village, Michael did not show up there, which made her mother-in-law think that they had gone somewhere together. Could she have deceived you like that? She pestered her son again. Mom, leave me alone. I believe and love Elizabeth. He could no longer tolerate all this talk. All right, the woman tightened her lips. And Elizabeth enjoyed having her son with her. She practiced with him, drawing, playing, assembling a constructor. She associated it as if she were in the desert, and she was very thirsty, and now she was given a bucket of water, and she couldn't get drunk. How he misses you, stood in the doorway, Jenny. Mother, don't pour salt on my wound, her daughter told her. All silence. The woman understood how Elizabeth feels bad even from these words. One day the girl suggested that they all go to town together, to get some air, to go to the park, to go shopping. Christopher was glad of this turn. He could not wait for the day when they would go. My darling, soon we will all live together. Then I will tell you everything and show you everything. She pressed her son to her. It was fun in town, especially for the boy. They stayed there all day and drove back in the evening. Jenny melted the stove and they cooked dinner. Then they talked for a long time. They had to put Christopher to bed. But when Elizabeth went to the room with him and lay down beside him, she fell asleep too. In the night, the girl awoke to some strange odor. Mom, burning. She saw that from the kitchen. She could already see the flames. She quickly sprang into action. From the room she was in, the girl could not go out. There was a lot of smoke. She fumbled for a small water bottle under the bed, wet her son's t-shirt, put it on his face, told him not to clean it up, then did the same thing herself. Oops, she was thrown a little away from the window when she threw the chair at him. By now the flames were already in this room as well. Elizabeth was saving her son, but all her thoughts were on her mom. She was in that room next to the kitchen. When the girl was outside, she could not cough. Water, quick, careful. Heard her exclamations of neighbors who had already called the fire department, but they had not yet arrived, so people were trying to cope with their own forces. "Elizabeth, are you alive?" Someone ran up to them, but she couldn't see who it was. "Mom," she said, gasping for breath. Someone tried to break into the house, but it was impossible. Finally, a fire truck pulled up, and everyone seemed to exhale. But when everything was extinguished, Elizabeth learned that her mom had not managed to get out. She had died in the fire. No! She fell to her knees in front of the house. It was a good thing that at that moment Christopher was led away by the neighbors. "Calm down," tried to lift her off the ground. "Go away, leave me alone." The girl was becoming hysterical. Hours later, Elizabeth was sitting in a neighbor's house, drinking a sedative. She was wrapped in a blanket and was just kind of in a trance. She mostly blamed herself for the death of her nearest and dearest. "Elizabeth, calm down," her neighbor was telling her. I can't. Why did it happen?" Now she spoke calmly, as if there were no emotions. "Listen, you had a choice. Who to save, the child or the mother? You made the right choice." She tried to somehow calm Elizabeth. But no one could comfort her now. She couldn't even call John, because then the truth about Christopher would come out, and she wasn't ready for that yet. A few days later, the funeral was held. By that time, the girl had recovered a little from the state she was in during the first days. The neighbors helped with everything. After the cemetery, we went to the canteen, which was kindly provided by the administration. "Well, are we going home now?" asked Elizaveta Neger. "Yes," she nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. She needed to be alone and think about everything, but it could not be done. There was always someone around. She decided to go to the city with her son for a few days. As she decided, so she did. She rented a room where they stayed. "My little one, come here," she called her son to her. "Where's Grandma?" he asked her. "My dear, she had gone to heaven." She did not know what to explain to the little boy, where now is the one who he loved even, perhaps, more than Elizabeth herself. She had been up all night. Something had to be decided. She couldn't hide here all the time. If John did not call at first and did not disturb her, now literally every hour dialed. "Honey, I'll be there tomorrow morning," she said. "I'll meet you," he always did. "You know, I'm very depressed. I'll probably call a cab," she saddened him with this. "That's expensive," he wondered. "So, I'll be right there. I'll tell you everything. You'll understand me." She didn't tell him until the last thing that happened. "Okay, then I'll be at work, and by lunch I'll leave," he said to his wife. They agreed. Now Elizabeth had calmed down a bit. She called a cab early in the morning. When it was still dark, she put her son in and they drove off. The cab driver, when he heard the address, was surprised. "There are buses there every 3 hours," he told the girl. "And what? I can't hire a car." She didn't understand. "Your business," he shrugged. They drove up to the village. Elizabeth hoped that the mother-in-law was still asleep, and her husband she did not doubt. "Don't go to the gate," she asked the driver. "Good." He drove a little farther. They got out of the car. Elizabeth paid. She took her son by the hand and led him to the stables. "Look at the horses, my darling." She showed him the animals. "Beautiful," Christopher smiled. "Will you stay here with them for a while?" she asked the boy. "Yes," he nodded. "Listen, it's a game of hide and seek. We'll hide from Grandma and she'll look for us," the mother explained to the child, but she couldn't, her voice breaking from tears. She led the boy to the very end, where there was a pile of straw. The girl spread a blanket there, made a hollow, and Christopher climbed in. Elizabeth hoped that they were up early, so the boy would get some sleep. "Remember one thing, you can't scream, and you can't go out either." She put her finger to her lips. "Mommy, don't worry, I know how to play hide and seek." He put his arms around her neck. Though she was very worried, she got out of the stable and went into the house. "Who brought you here?" Michael was standing arm in arm with her mother-in-law. "Emma, please don't start." She walked into the house. John was still asleep. She began to make tea for herself, not forgetting to pour some for her mother-in-law. "I heard a car drive up, but not to the gate," the woman kept muttering. "That's it, I'll talk about this only with my husband." She waved her away. "What do you want to talk to me about?" He left the room. "Beloved, hello." She came to him, hugged him, and burst into tears. "Elizabeth, what happened?" He knew there was something she wanted to tell him. The mother-in-law stood with a satisfied look. Perhaps she thought that the girl would now start talking about cheating and that she was leaving. Then she would be right about everything in her son's eyes. "My mom died," she said through sobs. "What? Why did you call me? I would have come and helped." and you were alone for so long. He pressed her harder against him. And maybe not alone, mother-in-law quietly muttered. Mothers, said John irritably when he heard this. At that moment, Elizabeth thought she would beg her husband to go back to town. She would have to tell him about Christopher and confess that she had been deceiving him for so long. If he wanted to leave, she wouldn't hold back. John sat down at the table. He ate breakfast, told the women not to fight, and went to work. The girl also went to the post office. She wanted to say that she couldn't work here anymore. Elizabeth, well, at least a week to work. We have no one to replace you. And on the nose of the pension, asked her boss. Well, she was very worried about her son. The girl was running around the village, as if terrified, when she came home very tired. But she could not go to the stables. She knew that her mother-in-law was always watching her. Only after supper, when all had gone to bed, she waited until her husband was asleep and went quietly out of the room as before. Christopher, she called out to him. Mother, and I hid myself so well that no one could find me, he told her. Here, look what I brought you. She placed food in front of him for him to eat. Thank you, he yawned. Elizabeth sat with the boy until it dawned. Then she left him there again and went into the house. Strangely enough, no one met her on the doorstep today. She walked unobstructed into the room, there pretending that she had just gotten up. Jenny, what will I tell you? Emma came running to her neighbor. What happened again? She was so freaked out. My sister-in-law, she was in the stable all night before she got here. I know that Michael brought her there, and she's been horsing around with him, she said, and that's when they saw Michael outside the window. Look, maybe you're right. He wasn't there when Elizabeth left. Jenny was beginning to wonder now. I'm telling you the same thing, but how can I tell John? They'll leave me here. He believes her. Not me. Emma was almost crying. Tell him so, or better, show him, the neighbor advised. What do you mean? Emma didn't understand. Watch, eavesdrop, record it on your phone, Jeannie advised. In the evening, Emma waited for her sister-in-law to come out. She saw her, wanted to follow her, but as quietly as she could not do it. Emma, is that you? Elizabeth turned around. The woman had to lurk in the darkness and keep silent. Everyone could see that Michael had just settled into the village. The mother-in-law was already so angry. She couldn't forgive some wench for cheating on her son right under his nose. On the third day, she was determined, even if her daughter-in-law heard her, she would still do it and catch her red-handed. Sonny, will you stay here a little longer? I wanted to cry, but Elizabeth swallowed her tears and held on. Of course, Mommy, I feel good here. It's warm. The horses are talking to me, he told her. Yes, they are nice. She got up and went to one of them. And again until morning with the baby, and then to work. Elizabeth saw that her mother-in-law could no longer contain herself, and then this Michael came like a bad sheet. He came to the post office, gave flowers, said compliments. It was heard by everyone, and of course, passed on to the mother-in-law. Tony, why are you bothering me? She said angrily to him. The girl did not sleep for a day, managed to rest for a few hours, and again had to work or do something else. Elizabeth, I can see that your husband, then with friends on vacation, then somewhere else disappears, is not home, Michael said to her. What do you care? She didn't understand. I like you, I don't want you to be hurt, he answered. You understand, it's a small village. Everyone talks about us. If before she didn't think about it when her mother-in-law talked about the stable. Now she was afraid that everything would be revealed. Now what she was most afraid of was not that they would find the baby or anything, but that she had lied to her husband for so long. Well, please, can I at least come to visit? I left everything in the city. I came here on purpose. I don't need anything. I can't think about anything but you, the young man told her. Michael, here, let's go. If we part with her husband, then you will start courting. And now, while we are together, please do not meddle with me, she told him. But apparently the guy was not getting it, and he did not do as Elizabeth asked him. That day she came home, did everything right, made dinner. She could feel Emma's back watching her. What? She turned to her. What? Cheating on my son, huh? If she couldn't talk about it with him, she wasn't shy in front of her daughter-in-law. What makes you think I'm deceiving him? Elizabeth was tired of everything. Do you think I do not see that when my little boy falls asleep, you quietly leave the room and sneak into the stable? The woman made a look as if she had revealed a great secret. If you don't know anything, then keep quiet, Elizabeth told her angrily. She too had had enough of these antics. "Oh, how you doubt, child. I know everything, and do not think that if I am many years old, then I am already very stupid," she said to her. At this point, Elizabeth was silent because she knew for sure that her mother-in-law thought one thing, but in reality, everything was quite different. "We will probably go to live in the city," Elizabeth told her at that moment. "She will go away." She clung to the guy with her teeth, and he, the fool, hummed his ears, believes everything she said, as if the woman was talking to herself. "Please don't interfere with our family," Elizabeth asked her. At that moment, John returned from work. He saw that the women were here alone, but both were irritated. "I don't understand why the world won't take you," he asked them. "Ask your wife." As soon as she started wandering around the village, "The world didn't take us." "Am I an enemy to my son?" Emma began to hint to him. "Mom, that's it, I don't want to hear it anymore." He was nervous again, and only now Elizabeth realized that it is not in their family problems, but in the family of her husband and his mother. She drives him to various conversations, and he could not believe her, and he could not take it calmly either. The girl stood up and held out her hand for him to talk in the room. "Come on, let's have dinner and then go to bed," he told her. "And that's all she wants, that you go to bed," gloated the mother-in-law. "Mom," the son said to her rudely. The woman was silent. She was really afraid of losing him. They ate, then, as usual, went to their room, lay on the bed. "Come to me." John put his hand under her head. "John, I don't have time for this right now. I'm all worked up about the last events, and your mom is adding fuel to the fire," she told him. "Yes, my mother can do it. If you knew what song she sang to me while you were away," he complained to his wife. "I have a rough idea, but trust me, she decided today that she wasn't going to hide anything from John, and she was going to bring Christopher into the house. She didn't care who said what or who did what." As she lay there thinking about it, she heard John snore. "Beloved, are you asleep?" She pushed him, but he didn't say a word in response. Elizabeth lay there for a couple more hours until it was dark and late. After that, she left the room and looked. The light was not on anywhere. She went into the kitchen as usual. Everything was already prepared for the evening trip to the stables, took the bag and left the house. Emma wasn't so stupid today. She knew where her sister-in-law had gone, so she waited until the door had closed and already unobstructed just walked to it. When she got outside, she saw Elizabeth walking towards the stables, looking around. "Now I'll prove it to everyone," the woman said to herself and followed her. She stopped at the door, waited until Elizabeth had gone all the way through, then went inside and hid. "Hello, my love." She heard what Elizabeth began to say. "My little one, tired, while waiting for mommy, fell asleep. And she says she doesn't go to anyone. She doesn't talk to horses like that," Emma said to herself in a whisper. "Look what I brought you here. But nothing, sleep, sleep, I'll sit next to you, pet you," continued to say daughter-in-law. How mother-in-law wanted to get out of her hiding place quickly, but she wanted to listen to the end of the matter. "You do not get angry with me. Do not take offense. Today I will tell John everything. Let him know that I have you. What he will think, then think, we part. So it is necessary," Elizabeth said in a calm voice. "Oh, you've got a nerve." Emma couldn't sit still any longer. "I love you, my good man," kissed his mother. At this point, the mother-in-law could no longer contain herself. She stood up to her full height and walked down the aisle without embarrassing anyone. "And what, do you want to say that you do not meet anyone here?" she began to say from afar to her daughter-in-law. Quiet. She saw her and heard her. Everything trembled inside, but she herself remained calm. "Quiet? What quiet? Are you still going to bring your lovers here?" said the woman indignantly. "Emma, please don't shout," the daughter-in-law said in a different tone. "Ah, don't shout. She is not shy, not afraid, or what?" The woman stopped a few meters away from her. "Come here," Elizabeth asked her. "Why, to look at your lovers?" "I don't want to," replied the woman. "Please come here," Elizabeth spoke calmly. As proud as Emma was, she made her way over to where Elizabeth was sitting. When she got closer, she didn't even lower her eyes. "So," she asked, "didn't you see?" The daughter-in-law was silent, and the mother-in-law lowered her eyes at that moment and saw Christopher. "What?" She was confused. "What, do you think it's Michael?" Elizabeth asked her. "I don't understand anything." The mother-in-law was at a loss for words. "Go home. Now he will wake up. I will tell you everything," Elizabeth asked her. The woman turned around. On cotton legs, she went to the house and could not understand anything. Christopher woke up 2 hours later. He saw his mom. He smiled. "Well, my dear, my grandmother found you," she said. "How can it be? I've been hiding here for so long. No one could find me," said the boy. "Let's get acquainted." She called him, gave him her hand, and they went out of the stable. As she led him into the house, the boy looked surprised at Emma, who was sitting at the table in the kitchen. "Hello," he said to her politely. "Come here." She beckoned him over to her. The boy came over. The grandmother leaned over. "Who are you?" she asked him. "I'm Christopher," he replied. "And who is this?" She looked at Elizabeth. "And this is my mother." He smiled and looked at her. "Elizabeth, explain what's going on." The woman looked up at her. "Maybe we should wait until John wakes up, and then we can all talk together." She had nothing left to lose. Great. Now the girl started setting the table to feed the child. "Are you my grandmother?" Christopher asked Emma. "Well, apparently yes," she answered him. "Why did it take you so long to find me?" Still, Christopher thought they were playing a game. "Because I must not have looked hard enough," the woman replied. She raised her eyes full of tears to Elizabeth. "Don't," she told her. When John came out of the room in the morning, he was surprised to see a mother, wife, and small child at the table. "I don't understand. What is this meeting?" He came and sat down there. "And we are all waiting for you for breakfast," Elizabeth told him and smiled. Then she went to her husband and began to tell him about her life with Austin, what he had done with her, how she had found out she was pregnant, that she had lived with her mother, and most importantly, she told him about the fire that had happened when she left. "What a fool I am." Emma blamed herself. "Why do you talk about yourself like that?" Elizabeth looked at her. "You know what I thought of you, more than others. It was I who spread gossip through the village," she confessed to Elizabeth now. "It's all over now. I hold no grudge against you," she answered. "Christopher, come here," she called him, and now she sat the boy on her lap and hugged him. "One grandmother left me and another came," he told her. "Yes, and it's true," the woman sobbed. John sat there, confusion in his eyes. He looked at Elizabeth and couldn't understand anything at all. "Elizabeth, we have never had secrets from each other. Why am I only now learning all this?" he asked her. "Do you remember when we were sitting with you and I asked about the children?" She reminded him of their conversation. "Of course I remember everything we had together," he answered her. "You said then that there was nothing to breed poverty and in general against children and everything else," she said. "You fool. Come here." He drew her to him. "I was talking about our future children, not the ones you had. I wouldn't mind even if you had 10. He started kissing her. "My family, forgive me." Emma was ready to kneel, and especially you, Elizabeth. "A good girl came here. She saw it at once. And why did you start thinking nonsense?" "Everyone, now that everyone knows everything, we can just go on living as a family," Elizabeth said. The grandmother no longer heard her. She was all engrossed in her grandson. The woman had been telling her son for so long that she had long dreamed of becoming a grandmother, and now, even if indirectly, but he fulfilled her wish. "John, shall we talk privately?" his wife asked him. "Of course. But if you want to ask about truth or faith, I tell you right away that there is nothing of the sort." He immediately anticipated her question. "Shall we drive back to town?" she asked her husband. "Let's see how Mom behaves now, and then we'll decide. Usually there was always kindness and fun here. I do not know why she behaved like this now." The young man shrugged his shoulders. "Christopher and I are going for a walk," Emma said. "It's so early." Elizabeth wanted to stop them. "It's okay, it's fine. Let him get used to it. He'll be going to school soon and he'll have to get up early." The new grandmother smiled. They walked out of the door and John drew his wife to him, hugging her. "You know what?" He looked at her. "No," she laughed for the first time in a long time. "Today looked at this boy, and although still in shock from these stories, but I want us to have our own," he muttered. She wrapped her arms around his neck. "Into the bedroom while no one's home?" he asked her. "Let's go," she followed him. "Aren't you going to work?" Elizabeth suddenly realized at the door. "It's all right, for the sake of the case." John winked at his wife. "Now I recognize my John." They entered the room. "Emma, who's that?" The whole village was wondering where the boy had come from. "Nookin, can you imagine, hid such a miracle from us," walked on, with her head held high, the woman. "Nobody hid me, I hid myself," Christopher said stubbornly. "Of course you did, you're a big boy." Grandma didn't argue with him. They walked almost all around the village, returning home when both their feet were buzzing so that they could hear it. "Well, son, where did she take you?" his mother asked him in a whisper, but so that the others could hear. "To a viewing," he said. "What?" Elizabeth straightened up and laughed. "It's all right," her mother-in-law came up to her. "I know it was, just someone didn't want to notice it." She hugged the woman. "You're not leaving, are you?" Emma looked at her favorite daughter-in-law, who had become a daughter this morning. "Not until you start suspecting me of something again," Elizabeth said, smiling. "God forbid," crossed grandmother. "Where is Christopher?" Elizabeth asked and became nervous, but when they turned around they saw that the boy was curled up asleep. "Quiet, don't wake him up," put her finger to her lips. She was ready to do anything to keep her grandson from being taken away from her. "Good, you should sleep too," smiled Elizabeth. She felt tired herself. "Okay, now, I'll just give my grandson a kiss, and then we'll go with him to Jenny's house in the evening. She invited him for pies, and I advise you to go out with John." Her mother-in-law winked at her. "You can be normal. Why did you pretend?" The girl laughed for the second time that morning. "Yes, and now I realize that even wise women can think different things." Elizabeth thought that the woman even blushed.